Good afternoon. Mayor Sohi will be joining us a little bit after 1:30, but in the interests of time, I'm going to welcome my fellow committee members back. I'm good. You were good? Okay. Welcome my fellow committee members back to our executive committee meeting today. So quick roll call. Councillor Rutherford?
Here.
Councillor Rice?
Good afternoon.
Councillor Knack?
Good afternoon.
Thank you, and we're joined by other council colleagues here in chamber, Councillor Jans,
Good
Councillor Cartmel, and I apologize, I am having trouble logging in, so can't see my colleagues that have joined us online, but I will introduce you as we go through the afternoon. Our first item up as a time specific is 6.3, and so I will turn it over to administration for presentation.
We have short opening comments if you'd prefer.
That's great, thank you.
Excellent. So today we're providing committee with a bylaw report that finalizes the process to designate Hangar 11 in Blatchford as a municipal historic resource. I'd like to point out that this represents accumulation of over 6 years of work on behalf of the administration and the new owners. As part of the designation, a rehabilitation grant of $5 million is being provided from the Heritage Resources Reserve to assist in the costs of the heritage rehabilitation work, which is estimated to exceed $15 million. The grant will be provided at a maximum of $500,000 per year over a 10-year period to lessen the impact on the reserve. The sheer size and historic significance of the building merited an exception to the typical Heritage Conservation Program limits of $500,000 in total. The grant request has been reviewed in detail with our finance partners, and we are comfortable that the reserve can manage the grant amount over the next 10 years, while still allowing other owners who are seeking to protect heritage properties to seek rehabilitation grants from the city. Today with me here are Mr. Johnston, David Johnston, our heritage planner, and a number of other colleagues to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I understand that we do have two public speakers, Tim Antoniuk and Dean Wolf. I can see you both online. Thank you for joining us. I see you're for questions only, so just want to turn to my council colleagues to see if you had any questions of the applicants, of the speakers. I'm not hearing any, so thank you again very much for being here. We will turn now to our questions of administration. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question, I have a few questions here. Just try to open my documents. So the first question is about a grant agreement. So grant agreement and this is not first time, this is second time, right? And so on page 3, number 3 of the report, and we specifically talk about through the process to sell the property to the new owner, and we back to 2016, and there was another grant agreement and another and $4 million provided, and based on that agreement.
Councillor Rice, the report is referencing a grant of $4 million that was provided to the Molson Brewery building, not to this site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what I'm a little bit confused. I want to ask that clarification. So it's a different building, it's not this specific site.
Absolutely different building, yes.
And then how that link, why that listed on here?
We just wanted to provide that connection to the fact that we have dealt with an extremely large heritage preservation grant before with the Molson Brewery building and spread it out over a 10-year period, just to show that we have done that before and it has been working as a sort of a precedent example, if you will.
Okay, so for this building specifically, and the next step and will be and commercialized, right?
Their intention is to redevelop the building as a commercial mixed-use project, yes.
And so if we redevelop the building and then redevelopment work and it will be done by the developers, so it's not under our city's capital project scope?
No, it is not a city-owned facility.
And so if that is the case, and why is this $5 million be provided?
This is typically what we do in order to preserve heritage properties in our city. Our heritage is really an important aspect of our city as a whole. So what we do is we partner with a developer in order to preserve those assets. So this is a typical thing that we do. The reason why this is at council is because it's of a higher value than some of the other grants that we've given.
So my next question is on behalf of my constituents asked, what's the benefits and for the Edmontonians, and what's the return for this continued grant funding, and almost right now and for the past, a larger building related, and this one 5 and 2 millions.
So Councillor Rice, there's a designated amount of dollars that goes to the Heritage Reserve every single year. And so this is already allocated dollars for heritage. And I'll let Mr. Johnston speak to the importance of heritage in our city and why we work to preserve the heritage properties.
Yes, thanks, Stephanie. Preserving these buildings provides that tangible connection to our past, and this is easily one of the most significant buildings in Edmonton, with its direct connections to the Second World War and the war efforts that Canada was involved with, in specifically Edmonton. And without the building in place, we lose that connection. There can be a story told, but that tangible connection is there. In this particular case, and what we see in most other buildings for sure, is that there is investment being made by the owners into that building to improve the structures. Employment comes out of that. A significant amount of contractors are involved already with this project. Investment into the building, and it becomes a property tax source of revenue for the city once it transfers over to an owner as well. So we get a combination of heritage preservation and redevelopment out of the project.
I do understand the importance of the heritage and to our Edmontonians, and there's no doubt for that at all. However, and then our city with limited resources right now, we have so many things our city need to consider and to prioritize and to invest. And then to me, and then it seems like this investment, and if we look at what's the return come back for this investment, how that's integrates aligned with our priorities and for the city. So my last question is this $5 million from already approved budget in 2022, or will be come with in new budget development?
There's a $2.3 million annual amount that goes to the Heritage Reserve, and then for projects like this, we draw the dollars from that reserve, Councillor Rice. So the allocation has been made for budget for this year. Going forward, we will be continuing to ask for $2.3 million a year for heritage properties within our city.
So that's
Thank you.
ongoing.
Sorry,
Yeah,
you're
ongoing.
Not,
Okay.
I want to be
Thank
very,
you.
it's not a new ongoing ask.
Okay. So it's already existing ongoing ask. Okay, thank you. So my time's out. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We can come back for sure. Before we move to Councillor Tang, and following from Councillor Rice's question, so one of the challenges would be if we did want to make it a public building, for example. It would be not only that $5 million that we're investing as a city, but that 75 total project cost. Is that correct?
It'd be substantially more.
Great. I do think it is interesting to think about other strategic outcomes that we can consider as part of our heritage granting program. So I recognize that our funding is explicitly tied to the restoration work. Is there option in future funding agreements to have other requirements around energy efficiency, for example, or other criteria that would help us work towards our city goals?
There's definitely an opportunity for this, and I'll let Mr. Johnston weigh in on. One of the things that challenges that we run into when we're working with developers who are attempting to preserve heritage buildings is exactly that, in terms of the environmental goals that we have, and even actually sometimes bringing them up to the base building code. So we work with each of the developers to work through those tricky situations, quite frankly, because we want to make sure that we stay as close to the intent of that heritage building as we can. At the same time, as a secondary goal, looking at those other outcomes for heritage specifically. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And I mean, right now we sort of have a fairly defined list of eligible work that we're willing to provide under our program. And right now, energy efficiency components are not typically included in that, but we're starting to see that more and more and more about, and that a connection between historic preservation and climate change adaptation and sustainability and carbon capture and all that kind of stuff. We are certainly starting to think that there are components of upgrading a building specific to sustainability and energy efficiency that should be broadened into eligible components of our program. A bit of the challenge is we only have so much money, and so we would prefer to try to channel those dollars to pure heritage rehabilitation work, but we are certainly looking at broadening that category.
Great. Well, and I wonder too if, just legally, even if we're not funding those improvements, can we still require them as a condition of a funding agreement? Because we do require that they make the other investments, the $75 million investment. So can that also include conditions about those types of improvements that wouldn't require additional funding from us?
We could, as we work at each of those grant agreements, and I know the team looks at those on each at an individual level, but I'm not promising because I do know we want to take the first, when we're looking with, we have so few heritage buildings, and so when we're working with them, we want to make sure that we're working to preserve the heritage of that building at the same time, as a primary focus.
Absolutely. And I think it's, goes without saying that any of the changes to the windows that we're installing now are going to be much higher energy efficiency than what was in place at the time. So there is sort of that implicitly built in, and I think making it explicit can also be really helpful as well. And then just for my own understanding as well, they can incur all of their project costs in less than the 10-year period. Is that correct? And then it's a payback, or will they be making those upgrades and modifications over a 10-year period?
The Rehabilitation Incentive Agreement has a deadline of December 31st, 2027 for the rehabilitation work itself to be completed, and then only that portion of the grant is paid out, and then the balance of the 5 years after that, there will be an annual allocation paid even though the work is complete.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Those were all my questions. Happy now to turn to Councillor Tang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I realize actually this question might have been better for the applicants, but I think I missed my opportunity there. So if Ms. McCabe, you should know the answer. Recognizing that some of the energy goals are more of the challenge that we're facing with preservation, but I'm curious if there's any sort of long-term plan to kind of strive towards that with this particular project.
I'll try to answer that, Councillor Tang, on behalf of the owners. I think certainly part and parcel of the rehabilitation work, on the hangar, for example, is looking at a new roof, on the structure and introducing some insulation to that roof where there isn't any right now. Some of those kind of components. As sort of was noted earlier, a lot of that is part and parcel with rehabilitation work already. I don't know if they have any specific objectives for certification or anything like that, but there is certainly a fair bit of that built into the process.
I do see Mr. Antoniak nodding his head pretty strongly. So yeah, no, thank you for that for that signal. I think the other part of my question was just for me to better understand that the reserve itself. By the time we hit 1.8 million in 2023, are we at risk of overextending ourselves with other heritage projects that may or may not be right now in the pipeline or that may be coming down?
Councillor Tang, we've worked closely with our finance partners, and we've looked at this projection over a 10-year period. And absolutely, there are some known projects that are on the horizon that we're projecting and have brought those into our evaluation of the impact on the reserve. There certainly are unknown projects that may be out there that we're not aware of yet. And as those come in the door individually, we work with those owners to discuss not only the scope of their project, but also the available capacity of the reserve to assist in providing grants to them.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just so I understand, I know this is replenished through the tax levy, sort of allocated at 2.3 million. But is that portion comes from the tax base as a result of these grants in the heritage space, or is that just sort of general tax levy?
Councillor Tang, that's general tax levy, so it's built into the base budget, so it's an annual $2.3 million transfer to the reserve.
I see, okay. And then for, but on this particular building, there will be a tax levy at some point, right?
Yes, there will.
Do you have a sense of the timeline? Or I suppose that was another question for the applicant. I'm sorry, I missed my opportunity there. In 2 years?
If I'm, yeah, reading sign language correctly, 2 years-ish.
Okay,
Plus or
okay,
minus.
interesting. Thank you. I really appreciate a bit more details on that. Anyways, that's all for me. I'm not on the committee, but I think this is a great opportunity. So thank you so much for even being here and answering questions through signaling.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Tang, and for the innovative presentations from our public members. I'll go back to you now, Councillor Rice.
Okay, very quick questions. First one, and due to this site is a combination of the heritage reserve and also the commercial development. So if this grant agreement and for the $5 million will not be in place, what the impact could be?
I think based on conversations with the owners, if this grant was not in play, this project would not be happening. The scale of the project, the cost of it it's critical to their needs to make this go forward.
And Councillor Rice, if we didn't have a private developer at the table, then this could have ended up being the city's responsibility. This could have been a city asset. And so this was really a way for us to be able to preserve the heritage aspects of this building and for the city not to take it on because we didn't have a need for programming in this building, as an example.
But the intention is for the commercial development. That's his intention, right?
Yes, private. My point is that
Yes.
it's a private sector led project, not a city-led project. It would have cost us a lot more to preserve the heritage if the city was to lead this project.
So my next question, thank you for that. Next question, just clear to Madam Clerk, and for the procedure question. And this bylaw is actually is attached with the budget and the money dollars. And why is it coming to the committee is not go to the city council directly?
I can maybe speak to that as chair. I think our committee will only recommend to council, and it will be council's final decision.
Yeah, I understand that, and I just wondering why this bylaw come to the committee and UNI's bylaw come to the city council and directly, and that is why my question. Thank you.
We also, or items also come to committee to allow opportunity for public.
Oh, okay, so for the public speaker.
That's
For that is the purpose for that, because we have the speaker request. Okay, so I yield my time. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rutherford?
Yeah, I move that Executive Committee recommend to City Council that bylaw 20084 be given the appropriate readings.
Great. Any questions? Wonderful. I will very briefly speak just to say I'm very excited to see this project going forward, excited to see it happening in my ward, happy to be host to that. Thank you very much for all the work that's happened over the many years that have led up to this. Congratulations. Well, I mean, congratulations for the recommendation from committee, and hopefully it will go well at council. Not presupposing. Let's call the vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the votes. And that's carried. Thank you. We'll moving back now to our first item, 6.1. If our delegation wants to come down to the mics. Thank you. I see Councillor Knack is here, but I believe that Councillor Rutherford, you still had some time on the board from the previous round. Would you like to start off?
Yeah, I'll ask a few questions. To administration.
And sorry, maybe we'll just give a few more moments.
Oh yeah, let's give a few more moments for everybody to get settled. Fair enough. So, as mentioned, I'm not putting the motion on the floor right now. Is that what was finally decided?
I would look to clerks for some clarity in terms of, I think the intent of the counselor is to, I think that we want to have a very fulsome conversation, so it's just understanding how limited we are in our line of questioning if there is a motion on the floor.
Members of the assembly can put motions on the floor whenever they would like. So the process of the meeting, in terms of flow, that's a little bit of a balance between the chair and the members who are putting motions. But if the counselor would like to put a motion on the floor, it's acceptable.
Okay, well, thank you. I certainly have no objections if that's the way you'd like to proceed, but
Well, I think that the issue was, Madam Chair, that then we are limited to that motion. So I will give everybody a first round like we discussed, but I do have a few questions then for administration.
please, over to you.
On option one, it says if we do option one, that the salary settlements for EPS would once again be held corporately and allocated following the settlements. Can you elaborate on that point for me, please?
So salary really, at the end of the day, salary adjustments are part of inflationary adjustments. And so if you're going to debate service packages only from the sense of allowing police to expand their services, then things like collective bargaining agreements have typically been dealt with corporately. We've held money corporately, and then when that settlement has passed, we then allocate that money to EPS. When there was a funding formula and they were getting growth plus inflation, we pushed that responsibility to manage salary settlements to them.
Okay, no, that's great clarification. I really appreciate that. And then I wanted to dig in under option two a little bit more, on that third piece of the formula, the one that kind of, the efficiency factor, I think it is called.
That's correct.
How is that determined based on what we do corporately, or how is that, because I know it was 1% in the last 4-year budget cycle. How is that efficiency factor determined?
So the efficiency factor, I think when we started the formula, it started at 0.25% and it was increased at one point in time. The efficiency factor is ultimately council's to decide.
So the efficiency factor is not sort of like the other ones where you're taking a bunch of data points to create that efficiency factor. It would be what we set it as.
Correct. It's not like statistically driven. It was placed in the formula to allow some functionality in the formula for the formula to enforce the same behaviors that we were following in the budgetary process at the city. Okay,
so could it, if council was to determine an efficiency factor, comparable to current inflation, not saying that it would be inflation, but just saying like 1% is still a huge gap between the inflation and population growth, would that be inequitable to kind of our process with our current budgeting and efficiency processes within admin? I'm just trying to make sure, like, again, one of the things that was brought up as a pro and con was around the disparity that it can create between how we fund certain departments and others, and I don't want it to do the opposite as well.
Yeah, so it's hard for me to comment on that going forward because we haven't got to all of the parameters of our budget process, but in a well-designed formula, that is what you would do, is you would look to what are the general parameters that you're holding the city to, and we too consider things like growth plus inflation, then we decide how much efficiency we can achieve to minimize the tax levy. You would then apply the same in the efficiency factor in the formula to police.
Okay, no, that's great that's great clarification. Those are all my questions for right now. I really appreciate those answers.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Over to you, Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, everyone, for the information. And again, just my apologies for those who weren't at the beginning. I'm audio only as transport to the city of Calgary for Alberta not to go watch the game. That would have been great, but not going for that reason. So few questions I have. First relate to the comparison conversation that in the report. I was wanting to dig into that a little bit because I even think about, say, the snow and ice control conversation, which we had just a few weeks ago. In that situation, we still went and got comparable information from other municipalities, while clearly putting in the report how things are different from the size of the city to the standards that they strive for. So of course, we can't be apples to apples, but it gave us something to work with and to understand. And so I guess I wanted to ask the question, how challenging would that be to go get information, particularly in advance of budget? Because I think we do it in almost every other department, so I don't think this would be any different.
So I would say that the math is relatively simple. It's a simple exercise to simply take the budget. There's a question on whether we should look at that. Is it expenditures per capita? Is it net tax levy per capita? Because those are different things. It gets more and more complex when we don't have the information on what the differences in the policing models are at the city. So it just becomes a simple comparative exercise with no context, which is difficult for us to provide any analysis on.
Fair, and maybe I should put that question more to the commission, which is that I think that should be something that if the commission doesn't already have, I would expect that they would do that, jurisdictional analysis. And so is there a way to know if the commission has that data, and if not, if that's something that they've been planning on doing? Because I think that's important comparative work to have.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Actually, per capita funding is not a really reliable indicator for comparison. Policing is not a commodity that can be compared or traded. You cannot compare apples to apples. For example, a small example, Calgary's 911 system is funded by the city. Here, it's paid for by the police service. There's also the difference in economical, social, health, political, crime rates, crime indicators. Look at the prisons and remand centers we have around Edmonton versus Calgary. It's very, very difficult to make those comparisons. Compound that outside of the province. There are provinces that fund their municipal police services differently. Winnipeg gets different factors than Ontario. I think Ontario funds their services 3%. So it's really not a fair or reasonable comparison.
I guess my question is, though, we those complexities that you've highlighted are things we deal with in almost any other department. And so it feels like to me, I'm being told that we can't do it because it's going to be really hard. But I think that's not necessarily reasonable. I think it's important to do that while recognizing there are a lot of complexities, like in everything else we do, and that data should be there to help decide and to help not use that exclusively to inform our decisions, but use that in addition to everything else that we do. And so I guess I'm wondering is at the moment there's no data like that available to us.
Part of the issue, Councillor Knack, is that there is not racialized data collection at this point in time, as the Commission is working currently with the Service and Statistics Canada, in that Edmonton, the city of Edmonton, is the largest gathering place of the Inuit, as we are the most northern city. Second to that, we have the largest population of intergenerational survivors from the Indian Residential School, which talks about the legacy and the impacts. And we know that First Nations and Indigenous people are largely the most incarcerated people in our city. So these statistics and data that you are asking for are not collected at this time. And we are currently looking at innovative approaches so that we can respond to these types of questions as we see policing is transforming, and those budget numbers, we don't know at this point because we are just starting to see some of the issues, the social issues, based on the legacy of the Indian Residential School, which, sir, you should be very informed about. Thank you. Absolutely.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. So it sounds to me like we've got a gap, and hopefully we can figure out a way to tackle that going forward. I'm out of time. I'll come back around. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Rice?
Thank you very much. My first question is to administration and regarding our city's operating budget. So can you provide me the specific data regarding our operating budget increase percentage and from 2019 to 2022.
Don't have that in front of me at the moment, but my recollection is 2.6, 1.8 or 9, 0 and a 0, I think, but we'll double check for you.
So, Councillor Rice,
Okay, go ahead.
2019 was a 2.6% tax increase. 2020 was a 1.3% tax increase. 2021 was a 0% tax increase, no tax increase. And 2022, which just recently passed through the spring supplemental, was 1.9%.
Thank you for the tax increase, but my question is not about the tax. It's about operating budget increase.
When you say operating budget increase, are you asking for the increase in expenditure budget?
Yes.
Revenue budget? Because what we quoted you is the tax levy increase, which would be net operating expenditures less growth.
So expenditures.
So the total tax levy expenditures, so the gross expenditures?
No, it's nothing to do with tax levy, and it's just compare. For example,
Yeah.
2022, our operating budget is 3.071 billion, and then compared to 2021, compared to 2020 and 2019. I want to see that increase percentage.
Sure, I can throw some rough numbers out there, Councillor Rice, and it also kind of depends on when you pull them from the budget documents, but relatively, it's 2019 was a $3.002 billion expenditure budget. 2020 was 3.007 billion. 2021 was 3.101 billion, and 2022 was 3.084 billion. The percentage increase for each of those years, so in 2020, that was a decrease of 1.5%, if you do the math on that. For 2021, it's an increase of around 4%, and for 2022, it was a decrease of 0.6%. So those are the numbers.
So is that safe to say an average is the increase for our city's operating expenditures budget and over 1%?
If you average those numbers I just gave you, it's not over 1%.
So what is this?
Just the rough math is about 0.5%.
Okay, and thank you for that information. So the next question is about our specific timeline for funding formula. Based on the presentation, there's two key milestones, and one is 2016, one is 2018. So pre-2016, we don't have formula in place. The process is the same as other departments. And can you provide a little bit of information from public perspective? Is there any complaint about before 2016 and after 2016 about our funding predictability? Forgive my English sometimes. Predictability.
Funding predictability?
Yes. Is there any public complaint or any public perception and then about this specific point?
Predictability for
Yes.
police funding or
For
the city in
police.
general?
For police funding.
I don't know that I'm comfortable enough with my memory on what the public sentiment was, but the move to a formula and predictability was driven by council at the time.
Okay, so is that safe to say, and then from public perspective, and we didn't receive the complaint and regarding the approach change on the police funding for the predictability. Hopefully this time I pronounce right. Thank you.
Like public complaint about the predictability of funding after the formula was introduced?
Yes, and before and after the comparison.
I think it's fair to say that we only started to hear those complaints in and around the time of the public hearing in 2020.
You had a chance.
Okay, my time is out, and
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor Rice. I'll go next before I go to other council members. I am, maybe you can start my time, please. Mr. Corbold, I'm really trying to figure this out. What is the best process for council or commission to take to figure out, because this is going to be an ongoing cost driver for the city police budget, what role police should be playing and what role police should not be playing, and whether it's some people may call it detasking or roles and responsibilities. What is the best way to get to that point? What is what that process? Any ideas look like?
Sorry, I just want to confirm, Your Worship, in relation to
In relation to
this
figuring
issue
it
of
out,
options, or-
having that comprehensive discussion around why is police necessary to respond to a car collision versus responding to a gang violence? Like, why would not someone else do that work?
Yeah. Well, I think the best process for that is for council and commission to have really good discussions about the intended outcomes.
Right.
And then, have that dialogue back and forth about how those intended outcomes could be achieved. So I really do think that is a good dialogue that should happen between the commission and council.
And so commission and council can have that discussion, and both commission and council has the authority to have that discussion, right?
I believe to have the discussion, yes, in terms of, being clear. I think it's fair for council to be clear with commission of what they would like to see with the money that is being used in the commission and in the police force, and I think that's a fair conversation. And I have to say that, that happens really successfully in a lot of places.
Yeah, because I'm really worried about the ongoing polarization on this issue. We'd love to get chiefs through commission, chiefs' thoughts, or anyone from the service, what that process could look like.
Mr. Mayor, Justin Crickler with the police service.
Yeah.
I think that for twice today, Your Worship, you've referenced traffic collisions, and I know that
I'm using
your
as an
concern
example.
transcends, I know, just things like that, but traffic collisions are an interesting talking point because oftentimes there may not be a criminal event, right, that goes hand in hand at times with what some people believe police should be involved in. But the Traffic Safety Act establishes that a peace officer has to be involved in that process. Now, that's one piece to it. The second thing is the director.
A police officer or peace
a
officer?
Peace officer, which is a term often used through the Traffic Safety Act. I believe it's peace.
Yeah.
The second thing is the director of law enforcement, which is a creature of statute, is that person works for the Justice and Solicitor General. They establish policing standards for the province. And for example, traffic is part of the policing standards that we have to have policy and practice to reflect that we are adhering to them. And by happenstance, traffic enforcement and investigation of traffic accidents are embedded in the policing standards. So again, Your Worship, I appreciate that your questions are about many things that police are involved in. My point, I guess, would be a lot of these are informed by statute and regulation, not necessarily where police want to be or don't want to be.
So how do we have the discussion where non-statute activities that police is undertaking could possibly be undertaken by someone else?
So that's what we're doing.
Okay.
That's what community safety well-being is. Police and social workers partnered up. Think of it as the follow-up to the call, not the first call, but the second call. There's always a safety component to most calls. Even if it's social disorder, there's a potential safety. When we talked about yesterday between myself and the city manager having to triangle a command, It's about having the right resource take the lead on this certain situation. So if it's derelict properties, it's fire. If it's campments, it's probably fire. If it's safety, gangs, anything on the safety where anybody's health could be in jeopardy, it's police. If it's just to deal with the social, then the partner and the help team takes over. That's the problem. We're doing that now. We're well on our way. We're 3 years into this, and we've just got 3 of our best crime reduction years ever. We do have flare-ups, and the flare-ups are in relation to violence in particular areas of the city. And those are the things that we're trying to address next. But if we're just looking at it a cost perspective, like say you're going to send CSOs, because we've heard lots of that, and CSOs are good partners for us, but they're also paid more than police for the first 4 years. So this isn't a cost thing. It's trying to get the right resources to stop these things in and getting them connected to services. And we're the first police service in the country to actually embark going down this way.
I would also say, if I could very quickly, Your Worship, that, you know, the conversation between council and commission also needs to be, I think, centered around, you know, the current, I think it's one discussion within the current context of an opioid crisis and a mental health crisis that is the root cause. Everybody, I think, sees that. And that's a different conversation to have then after that crisis. Once we have progress on resolving that crisis, then I think it's a different type of conversation because it's a totally different context. And I think that's a fair discussion, like the crisis now versus what we want normally.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm out of time.
If I may, Your Worship.
I'll come to my next round. I don't want to run out of overtime because we're going to run the clock pretty tight. So I'm already 1 minute over. I'll come for the next round. I'll go next to Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Corbould, my question is for you. From my understanding, there are reasons why council is at an arm's length from EPS, right? That's just good governance, correct?
Yeah, I think it's good governance, and the Police Act is very clear on decision-making and authorities.
Right. And so, sorry? Oh, when we hear, I've heard some speakers mention that the police are not being held responsible for their budgeting. I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Is that the role of Edmonton Police Commission to be ensuring that accountability?
Yes, and I believe so. And I also believe that I've seen no evidence to support that they're not being held accountable for their budget in any time I've been here.
Okay, great. Yes, I agree. And also, I just want to get the correct understanding that the police commission is, they are formed by city council, correct? That's how it's formed?
They're selected. Okay. Yeah, the commissioners are selected by council, correct.
Okay, and 2 city councilors are on that council.
Correct.
So really, we are at an arm's length, but we do have some form of seeing accountability.
Yeah, I think it's not as direct as it is, say, with the city manager administration, where I work directly for the council, and I think it's a little further removed with the commission, where the chief of police works for a commission who is appointed by council. So they're slightly different, and certainly a little more distant based on the current governance structure.
Okay, great. Because from my understanding, there are laws, there are reasons why city council is not, in direct contact with the police, or in direct, I'm not sure if discussion or contact with the police budget. That's the role of the commission.
Correct.
And I believe that they're seeing to that role very well. They're doing very well at that. So I just wanted to get a complete understanding that that the budgeting is being held accountable by EPC, and that's what I see. I don't know, Mr. McDougall or Ms. Callahoo Stonehouse, if you have any other comments?
Thank you, Councillor. Absolutely. There is a clear and required division between council and city police for exactly that reason, for the perception, or real or perceived, of political interference. The commission is responsible for presenting a budget in conjunction with the service to City Council. Once that is decided on, whatever the outcome of that is, we work within our strategic plan in conjunction with the chief, who shares our vision and our goal for a safe community. And then we allocate those funds to the service to meet those requirements. That allows that gap so that it is not seen that City Council is physically handing money to the service. That would be political interference.
As well as the level of competency. We have 2 lawyers on the commission. We have a beautiful and brilliant Black woman who runs the accounting at the University of Alberta, so she is very familiar with large budgets. Kemi, who's extraordinary. The piece for me that's very concerning and troubling that has come apparent in the past 3 days is that, you know, we talk about good governance and being arm's length the way. And today, you know, I've learned and seen over the past few days, Councillor Stevenson, who's one of our commissioners, had Rob Houle present, who's her paid staff, who has spoken multiple days about this. And I find this very troubling, and I would urge that she is immediately removed from the Police Commission and that another city councillor is replaced, because that is severely a lack of trust from Edmontonians. There is a conflict of interest, and I'm very disappointed at this. So I think that also needs to be addressed. If we're talking about good governance and transparency, there was nothing transparent about that.
Okay, thank you for sharing your comments. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I'll go to Councillor Salvador next.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. Yeah, so I just want to start with just a few questions that seek to understand and get some greater clarity around the existing funding formula and maybe some of the underlying assumptions that are built into that. So just to start off, what is the relationship between population and demand for policing? I guess there seems to be a built-in assumption that there's a direct correlation between population growth and the need for additional funding to maintain service levels. So is that kind of a linear relationship? Is there someone who could speak to that?
There's a few things that I can speak to just from both my chair and my previous jobs with policing and community safety and well-being. Is policing cop per pop was actually stopped by StatsCan several years ago, and I think somebody articulated today, I think it was Commissioner McDougall or Chair McDougall, because cop per pop basically doesn't take into consideration the discrepancies of a police service. There's some that measure cost per incident, how busy you are, and it's basically similar things to what the funding formula is. There's certain aspects of that in other areas, but it's also tied into what is your crime rate, what are you seeing on the ground, what are the supports you have in place. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to look at it, and I think Chair McDougall articulated that very well. It's not a commodity, but these things all need to be taken into consideration. For instance, if you just look and take 2 numbers, and has been done here in the past couple of days, and just say compare us to Hamilton or somewhere else, that's like comparing 2 different planets almost sometimes. But when you actually look at calls for service, the calls for service and the responding correlation way data is collected, it's all collected by StatsCan. So all of our stats that we produce and we put out, including the crime reduction over the last 3 years, go through StatsCan. So they're validated by a national standard. And as Commissioner Calhoun-Stonehouse mentioned, we're actually trying to be the first pilot project to get race-based data collected in there as well, so we can actually articulate that.
Okay. And the other question I think would be probably better suited to Mr. Corbould. I'm just wondering, given the current funding formula, there is sort of a mandate in there that EPS is part of all corporate reduction exercises, cost reduction exercises, and adheres to overarching corporate budget targets and goals. I'm just wondering what that looks like in practice. Is it possible to kind of give an example of what that would look like? And I'm thinking about when we had the previous target of 0 for tax increase. How was EPS in alignment with that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, I'll see if Ms. Padbury has some specific examples. But I think, I just thinking in the time I've been here in the last year and a half, there's been, lots of discussions about, sort of fiscal constraint, but also doing other things. And we kind of work collaboratively with the library and EPS and all our partners. And we kind of have a good collaborative discussion about, can we cut here? Can we add there? And they're, I would say they're collaborative discussions, but I'm just trying to think of a very specific example. And maybe Ms. Padbury has one.
I don't have a specific example. I would say, though, we share our budget guidance across the corporation, but because of the unique relationship between the commission and council, we don't determine their budgetary ask. And so the way to do that is the way that council had to, before them to do that, was by adjusting the efficiency factor in the formula, or council providing the guidance to them to reduce in the same manner. So when administration worked to reduce to 0, council did not provide that same guidance to police.
Okay, I guess I'm struggling to see how that piece of the formula is actualized, I guess, in practice. Because it sounds like there's, the option to use the efficiency factor as that tool, but it sounds like majority is just based on kind of collaborative conversations. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, so I would say once the efficiency factor is set, it remains in place until you set a different efficiency factor.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Councillor, that what I meant is there's some good collaboration for ideas on these kinds of things. In the end, I think it's the commission would have to sort of, what I do essentially from an administration perspective in terms of the savings is something that the commission would do directly with the EPS, not for us to do as administration through a formula by either telling them to do it or asking them formally to do it. That'd be more of a thing for commission to have.
And I think we could share some of those things with you right now, if you would like, Councillor Salvador, because there's quite a list, and I would turn it over to Lori Lorenz.
Sure, I'm out of time, so I'll come back for another round.
For next round. Councillor Cartmel.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. So, Chief McPhee, I brought the chart up here from the I think 13-part motion that was made right after the series of public hearings we had in response to George Floyd murder and the BLM conversation that was happening about that. So this is June 2020. And understanding that this is a budget formula conversation today, but there's been some comments made through the discourse today, and I just want to kind of go back to a couple of things. And I guess my first question is, do you recall that we talked about potential changes to the Police Act? So things like bringing all of those involved in police work, transit peace officers, community peace officers, police officers, under the purview of the Police Act. We talked about attaching the right resource to the right time for the need, and I recall a lot of agreement on that discussion. Spoke to co-dispatch, but it also spoke to a middle ground of allowing sworn officers to do their work without a uniform, without a badge, without a gun, which, as I understand it, is not currently allowed. Unless or under certain circumstances. It talked about adjustments like that, a lot of which have been touched on today, but which have not been enacted yet because we're waiting for changes to the Police Act, yes?
Yeah, there'll be several anticipated changes to the Police Act. One, for sure, will be on the discipline piece. Certainly on the powers and the authorities, as Mayor Sohi has also commented to. Police have a robust discipline process, as we all heard, and there's changes that need to be made to the HR, which we've suggested process for it to do quicker. But we've also made the request to make that arm's length, so the police discipline is looked by another body. And eventually, if that ever, right now, how that could work is you know, technically, that's the same for a peace officer, right? It's a different act, but they're still looking at some different changes in relation to how you have some accountability, because in policing for a reason, and I'm not sure which councillor asked it, as for policing for a reason, the separation, as was mentioned, I think it was Councillor Principe, is absolutely mandatory and set out in law, not just legislation, in law. And when that comes into question or comes into practice, your appeal body or your appeal piece goes to the province. So commission has the authority, obviously works with council, and then ultimately the overseer of municipal policing is the province.
And so we've heard some conversation today that we might migrate some of the work that is contained within the Police Act. I think it's the Police Act or the Traffic Act or in the regulations to those acts to other parts of city administration or other individuals. But we can't just transfer it. We have to follow the law.
Yeah, when you're talking traffic services, there's obviously a reason that we have to go to traffic accidents. It's legislated, it's set out on how those have to be reported. There's obviously insurance and everything else, plus there's an investigation. It's a criminal investigation, or it could just be a highway traffic act investigation. You have to have all those legislated authorities, even to issue a speeding ticket, and that's why the separation of photo radar is different than traffic. And as you've articulated there, from a police service perspective, our number one complaint right now from our citizens, even though all we're talking about, is traffic.
Speeding cars, noisy mufflers.
All inclusive.
All that.
Yeah, and we have a full traffic unit for that.
Right. So Chair McDougall described the challenges in jurisdiction to jurisdiction statistics. And so that's part of my question. But I heard you say, Chief McPhee, just a moment ago, that we've had the 3 best crime reduction years ever. Now, I'm presuming that that is a Edmonton-centric metric, that you can show improvement from year-over-year improvement on certain metrics. Is that fair? Is that something you can show through that?
Yeah, yes, and it's measured against other police services too. So let's be clear. COVID gives some reprieve because things like shops and stuff weren't shut down, were shut down. But what we've closed the gap on every other police service. So we closed the gap on all Alberta police services, and we closed the gap on the Canadian, both on property, violence, in every crime category for 3 years. Now, that said, is what we've articulated before with our next step for budget, we can see the flare-up hotspots that need attention, and they've been talked about lots. 118th, Chinese business community, Macaulay, downtown. And those were the things that we were talking with the city manager at the point of how do we use a joint operation to maximize resources to actually do this, and that's where this all fell off the rails, because we didn't get to do that. But to be very clear, and you know, certainly it was mentioned by a councillor earlier that, you know, going after catalytic converters, we shouldn't be doing that. The citizens of Edmonton lost $13 million a catalytic converter and a whole many more $1 million on that. So to think that isn't serious for our citizens, I think is a bit of a gross understatement, but we get calls on that all the time, and that's something we're trying to address through a community safety accelerated challenge as well with their foundation.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Councillor Jans.
Yeah, and without a doubt, it's catalytic converter theft is absolutely serious. I haven't met a lot of people who are stealing catalytic converters to get into the University of Alberta. Most of the time it's driven by addiction, and that's, you know, what we're hearing from frontline staff and neighbors and others. And still, until we can get the province to make meaningful change on decriminalization and harm reduction and safe supply and these other pieces, like if we could give people the legal equivalent of what they're addicted to, bike theft, catalytic converters, we could fix it. But I know the mayor knows this. I wanted to go to questions around independence, and we've heard from the commission, we've heard from the service, we've heard from administration here. The other piece that's kind of missing for me is the role of the Edmonton Police Foundation, because they contribute financially to the service, to capital, etc. They seem to have a operational ability to direct or suggest, and I would like to unpack that a little further, and maybe just for context, I think a number of councillors have received correspondence from, I think they're called the Alberta Liquor Store Association, concerned over a slippery slope around mandatory ID scanners at certain shops. Could be liquor stores, could be in others, and there's concern here that this push from the police, and they attach a letter from a sergeant around this, is about the push towards this mandatory technology. So whatever it is, if we are in a situation where a corporation can make a donation to the foundation, and like, I'm trying to understand.
Question.
Well, I'm trying to understand the relationship here in terms of independence as we're talking about going forward. In other communities, I mean, I don't know who can swing at that. Who wants, is that a commission question or service or, yeah?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that, Councillor. I mean, I think in terms of independence of the Police Foundation, it's under the Charities Act. They're a registered charity. They direct funding how they please.
Can you speak up? Yeah, thank you.
I get this a lot.
Yeah.
So on the independence of the Police Foundation, it's a registered charity. They determine where they want to dispense their funds. That's under the Charities Act federally. For us, though, in terms of liquor stores, and I'm glad that you brought that up, this is a concerning issue in the city of Edmonton. This is something that is driving a lot of demand for calls for service. It is a safety issue for people who are going into these establishments to shop, from seniors to young folks. This is something that we are glad that you've taken notice to, because we're looking to try to get all hands on deck to try to find an innovative solution to address this, or at least curb that demand. So, like we said, police can be going to other events.
Yeah, I think in this case, some liquor stores are communicating to us that they'll be put out of business if they're required to upgrade to this technology that they're physically unable to, or their leases or whatever, and that it may benefit one business with a piece in the game. Another one I saw today, we're doing this tow truck program with AMA, where the police are going to be working with one company, AMA, which is a private company, right? It's not publicly owned, I don't think. I believe it's a private company. So I guess I'm just wondering about how do we preserve integrity around corporations and businesses and service. We don't ever want to create a perception of a pay to play scenario.
No, absolutely, and there absolutely is no scenario like that. In terms of what you've been hearing from the liquor stores, we've been doing our own engagement, door to door, speaking to the liquor stores about any constraints that they might have, trying to source out their solutions to ultimately drive down the issue of liquor store robberies, and that's ultimately what we're trying to get to, one technology or another, but try to find an actual solution to curb the demand that the police are receiving.
So how does the decision for, the foundation makes their decision, how does the service decide whether or not they accept funding, resources, stuff?
We could make a submission to the foundation for funding something, but when you're talking about the liquor store thefts, that was just, we had the data. It was all about victimization. How do we reduce victimization? And so to say stores are going to go out of business, it costs $1,500. I'm not sure that's going to put anybody out of business, but the same point is, that's why we went to the province. Can they actually take a look at this? Because the victimization, the robberies, the pepper spray and the beatings, and, these are, as you can recognize, these are our kids, our parents, our parents. This is a serious concern. And when we had 9,600 of them in one particular year, actually the numbers are very similar to the catalytic converters.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess so. The partnership with AMA on the tow trucks, for instance, that looks like a service-driven partnership. How do we pick which businesses to work with and which ones not to?
Quite frankly, some of these organizations do reach out to us, understanding when we communicate about the issues that we're seeing within the city of Edmonton. Something we're working on with AMA at the same time is ensuring that we can get vulnerable people who don't have ID access to ID, because that actually precludes them from actually working through the system. So it's not just one particular partnership that we're looking at, or one function that we're looking at. We're very happy that the business community is willing to step up to try to address things that we actually don't have the resources or the ability to address.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Councillor Tang?
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess I have a number of questions specifically about the different areas in the report, but I want to start with just a bit of some of the comments from the last few days from the public, and just a bit of an observation. And this is to members of the commission. I think there's a lot of expectations around transformational change. And certainly that is what I think of when I look back at the Safer for All report. And then the expectation that perhaps this change is not happening fast enough. So, gets at that timeline question. And I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts, members of the commission.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure City Council can appreciate operating a $3 billion budget that things don't turn on a dime. If you were to look at, say, the last 13 years, let's go the last 10 years before Chief McPhee came in, examine the amount of money that was spent on the service and the change in the crime rate. I would then ask you to look at the last 3 years when the commission hired Chief McPhee as a change agent, as a way to change policing with a focus on community safety and well-being, and have a look at your crime rate.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes 3 years. So now that we have this positive move, we can start to see the ship turning in the water.
Yeah.
This is not the time when we need to change how we do business.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you certainly highlighting some of those indicators. And I think there's also a piece around culture change. So I'm wondering if other members of the commission who's there, I can't tell everybody in the room, but I think I heard
This
Commissioner
is
Stonehouse.
Commissioner Callahoo Stonehouse. It's a
Yes,
great
please.
question. I think for me, especially coming in as a defund the police and very angry about the work of police, and then finding myself immersed in transformative change and witnessing, equity and diversity inclusion initiatives happening, participating in the Muslim symposiums and the Black symposium, and seeing the helpline and, just visiting relatives down in Boyle Street and seeing the different ways that police are interacting with relatives who are vulnerable and watching them come off the streets due to service members going above and beyond the call of duty. Like, it's extraordinary, the work that I have witnessed. And I wish I could show each of the council members as well as others of the public some of the miraculous work that I've seen. And there also are very fractured things that need to be improved. Let's not kid ourselves. This is a colonial system that has been functioning for over 150 years. It's not perfect, but I have witnessed transformative change, and I am encouraged with where we're going. And I think it would be a great disservice to this city if we took a step back. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And certainly I hear what you're saying, that there is change, and then there is the sort of difference in how quickly that change should be happening, and the expectations that comes from very diverse communities. So I guess it is, I suppose, under that context that I kind of looked at this report and the policies that we're looking to review right now. So I'm probably going to need a few rounds, but I'm going to be pretty granular in some of the content in the report itself. There's a number of references, I think, to the performance tracking laid out in both options 1 and 2, essentially moving in the direction of recommendation number 14. But I'm also cognizant that in the EPC-EPS response to the Safer for All report, attachment 2 for item 6.1 on Monday, there was commentary that this will be really challenging and risk, heavily politicizing and might even contradict, what is laid out in the Police Act. So I guess, Mr. Corbel, I'm wondering what's your response to that?
Yeah, so I know that we did a detailed check on all 3 options in this presentation, and we believe that they are allowed within the Police Act and proper in all forms, because I wanted to make sure that all 3 options were legal in the current legislative context. The reason we've recommended option 2 from my perspective as administrator, is it just provides the certainty in a 4-year budget. And I hark back to what I was told when I got here about why we went to police form in the first place, which was in many ways motivated by trying to stop continual increases and sort of moderate the budget a bit. And so from my perspective, it's clear for administration, it's clear once we set that 4-year track what it's going to be, and it's based on performance measures. So That's why we've recommended this, but all three options are legal from a Police Act perspective. So I hope
Great,
I
thank
answered the
you.
question.
I'll come back.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much. My first question is for Ms. Padbury. Just wondering when the 4-year cycle budget is prepared, and because I know all I've seen is the operating budget, service packages and whatnot. But so when the 4-year cycle budget is prepared, does that take into account things like our growing population and inflation rates? Are those factored into the figures that you'll be providing us?
So in this particular budget cycle, yes, it's our intention to factor in growth and inflation. I would say that has been our practice in years in the past, but when mid-cycle, last cycle, when we experienced both the pandemic and a general decline in the economic environment in Alberta, there was a desire to bring the approved tax levy down to a lower number, and that is in part what drove the pressures last cycle. But generally, we do try to factor in growth plus inflation to the main city budget.
Okay, so that's not dissimilar then to what's being looked for in option 2, right? Where that's the growth and inflation is taken into account as well.
Yeah, that's correct. And the original formula was designed on that basic budget principle.
Okay, and then that efficiency factor, I understand that it's not statistically driven, as you said, and it is more of a qualitative. So is there any parameters that council can put on that? Because it's a negative, right? Isn't it? You're subtracting it? Like could the budget be reduced?
Yes, in fact, that's what the efficiency factor is for, is you would set the efficiency factor and that would lower the funding as part of the formula.
So that would allow for more uncertainty, I would think, wouldn't it? Because in the budget, if we do option 1, you set the budget, or we set the budget, council sets the budget, and so you know exactly what it is going forward. There's no variable or uncertainty there.
Right, so remember you would be setting it for a 4-year cycle. So when you set it in the 4-year cycle, I would say I would favor the word predictable over certainty, but it gave some predictability of funding to the service.
Okay, thank you very much just for clarifying that for me. Then I did have another question. For Mr. McDougall from the commission. You'd mentioned that there's so many different variables to compare to other forces throughout the country and that. And one of the things you'd mentioned was about the 911, the dispatch center, and that. I can't recall the city that you talked about, but that, or maybe it was most cities, the funding for those are covered through the city. But isn't that the way that we're moving now with the community safety and well-being report?
I believe the way we're moving forward is a blend of responsibilities for that 911 center, but I may turn to the city manager to clarify that.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I missed that.
So sorry, the funding for the new dispatch center, I thought that's what the part of the request was yesterday, was the funding for that.
Yeah,
From a city admin, not from, so.
Yeah, that's correct. It was
responsible.
Yeah, and again, that was specifically for the project manager, the executive director, and the FTEs to get it going and started. There would be other, as we figure out the second part of it, which is winding down my dispatch and fire service, for example, and others, once that is created, we'll have to figure out what those efficiencies are, and we just don't know those. And just further to that, yesterday, the difference between 1.5 million in this fiscal year and the ongoing 2 is because the 1.5 is prorated for what's left of this fiscal year and the start of the project.
And just the 2 were added together for ongoing, but that's all we know of at this point. Okay.
Correct.
And so would some of that then reduce some of the funding pressures on EPS?
I don't think so immediately, in the same way that it doesn't reduce funding pressures on the Edmonton Fire and Rescue Service, because they still have to do their dispatching right now, every day, every minute. I think it's about how we could get savings on the back end of that once we establish joint dispatch and prove it and make sure it's reliable and providing public safety, and then adding all the pieces that we want to add to it, and then you potentially get savings down the road.
Okay, I did have one other comment, but I'm out of time, so thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you. It's been a really illuminating discussion. There's some clarification I need on some things. One is, and this is maybe to a rep from EPS, maybe it's someone from the Police Commission. I remember there was a service package on cannabis legalization. And actually, maybe someone from the city could even answer this. I don't recall that council accepted that service package because there was am I remembering this correctly, that the service package was not accepted during that budget discussion because it was considered to be something that should be as part of the base funding, or I can't remember clearly.
So the service package originally for $1 million was accepted, but then there was a larger one coming that was not accepted and fell off the plate. So the original service package that was put forward was accepted.
Okay, the $1 million, but not, I think I was thinking it was in the neighborhood of $5 million at some point. Okay, so sort of split down the middle. The second thing I'm looking for some clarification on, I've heard I'm going to call it the proportional response number, thrown around a couple of times. It's that, 19% of calls come from the downtown and therefore 19% of resources should be allocated there. But is that 19% number coming from dispatch? Is that total calls for service? Including investigations. Could someone clear that up for me?
Deputy Chief Durko here. I'm in charge of our Community Policing Bureau, so that's patrol.
Okay,
thanks for that
just
question.
patrol.
Because, yeah, so the distribution of our resources are typically pretty much spread evenly across the city because the geographical areas and calls for service are similar. What we're having happen in downtown is in the last couple of years here, it's really spiked. A lot of disorder calls, that type of thing. But there's about 100 constables in patrol and the additional ones with 20 beat officers. But we can't forget about all the other resources that are being sent into downtown area. Our disruption teams are responsible for a lot of the disorder on the LRTs, the encampments, they assist there. They also assist with all our demonstrations. So they spend the majority of their time in the downtown. A lot of our help teams and supports are dedicated for mostly downtown. I think we have 2 teams that are dedicated right out of the division that are working evenings as well, assisting our members with disorder calls and mental health calls. So it's so complex. It's not a matter of just taking 19% and then saying 19% of your resources into downtown and it's solved. I mean, downtown, even geographically, being able to get around in downtown area is a lot different than Southwest Division. We're also looking, it's going to be at the end of May, doing a border change. So the Royal Alec and Kingsway Mall in that area is now going to be in Northwest Division. So that's going to also make a little bit of an impact on calls for service in downtown, where one of the other divisions will be responsible for that. So we're working on this continuously. It's not just a mathematical question where you can say 19% and 19% of your resources go there.
Thank you for that. I have a number of other questions. I just, one of the things that I think the mayor started to touch on, and I really want to dig into this, is that there's what the Police Act determines. Okay, so the Police Act says essentially that municipalities have a duty to ensure that policing is adequately funded, but it doesn't prescribe what adequately funded means. Is that correct, Mr. Corbould? Or even Mr. McDougall?
That's certainly my understanding.
Yeah. Okay, and has the province given and the province hasn't really defined what adequately supported or funded means. But as I think was brought up, there are the policing standards as set out by the Director of Law Enforcement. Correct?
Yeah, there are standards, and I would say council, that's why council, when appointing the commission, takes so much care in appointing the right commissioners.
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Crickler, you had mentioned traffic being one of them, but that also includes things that we've heard critiques about, for instance, like tactical is required under the Alberta policing standards. Like this, this isn't privileged information. This is on the public Alberta policing standards guiding document. Investigations, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, forensic identification services, tactical work, those are all required under the Alberta policing standards, correct?
That is correct. There are some standards that will drive a budget item. Forensic services, high-risk incidents. There's a provision about people in custody. We have to operate a jail facility. There are some that don't necessarily drive a budget. So, for example, we need to have policies about criminal flight events when people flee from police. So many do drive a budget discussion, some don't.
But if there is direction given implicitly or explicitly with respect to those standards that do impact, or if those aren't funded, that would have a conflict with either the Director of Law Enforcement and their explicit instruction or the Police Act, correct?
Correct, and the Edmonton Police Service is audited against those standards, and I think it's every 2 years, but I could be mistaken. Every 4 years, I think.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Paquette, you haven't had a first round right yet.
No, I'm happy to go after Councillor Stevenson.
Councillor Stevenson already had a first round, my understanding, so you're next.
Okay. I was hoping to get my camera working for you, but technical difficulties. All right. Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I think it's been maybe a little bit in the weeds, but following up on Councillor Hamilton's comment about adequately funding and how we don't actually have a definition of that, it gets a little tricky. So, Mr. Corbould, I'm just wondering. Okay, so in your opinion, does council adequately fund DPS?
So in the last funding formula?
In general, is like right now today, is EPS adequately funded? And appropriately funded, I guess, is the wording. Appropriately funded.
Yes.
Okay. So, but that contains a realm. That answer contains a realm of caveats. I would imagine, considering where council wants to go, where EPS wants to go, where the public wants to go, as far as community safety and well-being. Is that right?
Yes, I think it becomes a much more complicated discussion, and I think you've really expressed the importance of the word adequate.
Or appropriate.
And I would say that, there's always more we can do. There's always more things to do. And the definition of appropriate and adequate really is, in the end, the public, I guess, decides, right? And I think it's important to mention that because council's heard over the last few days from a lot of public members who would say no to the answer that I just provided because of what their needs are with safety. So
right.
It's a wide variety.
But is that based on experience or based on knowledge of operations? And that's where I'm coming up against some tough questions, because I'm pretty agnostic about all of this, to be frank. I just think we have a set of goals that we should achieve, and we should achieve them in the best ways we can. So, I don't know about the internal deployment decisions of EPS. And frankly, I shouldn't know. It's not really my area of concern. My area of concern, though, is appropriate funding. So, not knowing how that money is spent, again, not my business, but it is the public's business. And that's where it gets tricky, because I want to appropriately and adequately fund everything. But the question that we're all confronting here today is, what does that mean? And I don't believe the report actually got to that.
Yeah, and I would say that our focus on the report, and another way to answer your question about appropriate funding is our strong recommendation is that use a funding formula, because it, of all the three options presented, it is the one that provides the best clarity to those who have to make all those detailed decisions and most certainty. So that's our professional advice from an administrative perspective, which is why it was our recommendation. I think how you perceive that on the ground is going to largely depend on your personal experience.
If I could just...
And it really shouldn't, though. It should be based on data. It should be based on measurable factors. It should be based on what are our goals and how do we achieve them and how do we best achieve them. If it means increasing EPS, okay. If it means increasing what we do in the social helping realm, okay. But we don't have the data.
If I could just interject there, one of the things that in 2020, and with the premise of still having the funding formula, the EPS has a very robust planning framework. And so we, within our funding formula, sit with our commission and we develop our goals, which we have outcomes all the way down to our branch level with measures, and we provide data. There's an annual report that you'll see on the EPC website that was just released in April, and we make decisions on what we need to do to achieve those goals and how much that will cost. We present that to the commission and they approve that or not approve that. And that's how we work within our funding formula and do make our decisions based on the measures that we have. So that is our commission telling us what they want us to achieve, and we tell us what it's going to take to do that.
And then just
which is great, except for the public, they want to know about how that money is spent. Personally, I think that it's okay to trust organizations who know what they're doing, but the public wants to know, and that's where it gets a little sticky.
Yeah.
We also publicly report how we spend that money. Yeah. We publicly report that associated to what we're doing.
But there's a larger question here than just
Paquette.
that, and I'm out of time.
Just to add quickly, Councillor Paquette, on the adequate funding. Like if I look at the city administration side of it, I would say the answer, yes, I'm adequately funded. That doesn't mean we don't have really tough decisions to make, and it doesn't mean that there's going to be lots of citizens who are unhappy with certain results in front of their streets and where they live and their particular lived experience. But I think we're adequately funded as a municipality, but it's tough decisions.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. So that concludes round one. And as I stated earlier, this will be an opportunity to make make motions. And Councillor Rutherford suggested earlier that she does have a motion. So this would be an opportunity, Councillor Rutherford, to move that motion.
Yes, City Clerk, do you have that to put up on the screen?
One moment, please. Yes, we have it. Apologies for the delay.
It's okay. Just very quiet in this chambers right now. Just waiting for the full thing.
In the meantime, while waiting, can you start kind of socializing the motion, Councillor Rutherford?
I'd rather read it in and then explain that.
Here you go.
Here it is, yeah.
There we go.
So the motion that I'll read in is that Edmonton Police Service receives operating funding of $385 million net operating requirement starting in 2023 on an ongoing basis, not including funding from the Traffic Safety and Automated Enforcement Reserve, and then the budget process for police funding aligns with existing civic department processes, and I'm missing the end piece there, Clerk. Civic Department for the development of the 2023 to 2026 operating budget. So just to introduce this, I think it's really important, and part of one of the things that I talked about a lot of is making sure that we're having the brave and honest conversations. And I think the funding reality is such that I want to make it really clear, at least from my perspective, take all of the conversation aside. We're looking at a really hard fiscal reality for our municipality. And I think, I think it's better to put a base budget out there now and know where the baseline is that we're working with. This does not presuppose that we're not going to give further funding in the budget discussions and deliberations in the 2023 to 2026 budget. It just means that I want to be clear that we're not starting at that 407 million, because as the report that's going to be coming up next highlights, we're in a deficit in that traffic reserve, and I don't think it's fiscally responsible to do that. I also feel like it is unsustainable to have the police funding go up year over year over year, while other departments do not have that same luxury. And I think about snow and ice as a perfect example of how beautiful it would be if we could have done that based on growth and inflation, but we didn't. And we can't, because it would be unsustainable to do that same funding formula with every single department budget line. And so I do think from an equitable perspective, it is fair to do option one, which is to actually have the same process that we do with all of our other departments for anything above and beyond that base budget line. And I think for my last comment, I think, I definitely feel it up here. I'm sure Chief feels it, I'm sure Commission feels it. But the thing is that I have heard over and over again that we are all working towards the same goals and outcomes. This is clearly, for me, a dollars and cents conversation. And it is treating the police the same as we would treat any other city department, and making sure that we are looking and forecasting for that certainty for police over the next 4 years, as we do with all the other budget lines. Thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think I have a few questions for administration, and then we'll follow up on the motion on a later round. So I understand that part of the reason behind the funding formula was really to induce constraint in the budget. But when I was looking at the numbers from 2019 to 2022, it seemed that it grew by about 14%, from 356 million to 384. So is that comparable to other city services during that time?
So it isn't, and part of the reason is that change in mid-cycle shift to, so in the beginning of 2019 to 2022, the formula was established and council approved budgets. I think the original budget was 2.6% tax levy in each year of the 4 years. Partway through that cycle, decisions were made to reduce the municipal budget, but no decision was made to reduce the police budget.
Right. Great. And I apologize too. I think that my 14% actually came from a calculation if we had carried through the formula. So I apologize. I think I misspoke on those numbers. So it was just looking at what the effect would have been if we had kept the formula running for that full budget cycle. So just want to pick up too on the question of stability and predictability. And I think one of the suggestions against option one was that it would be less certain. Would EPS not be able to submit sort of the 4-year, like I think that when we were doing our 4-year budget cycle, there can be 4-year programs. It's not necessarily year by year. We could do that 4-year planning process. Is that the case?
Yeah, so EPS would, under option one, EPS would submit a 4-year budget, and we would approve it in a 4-year context with the main city budget.
Okay, which wouldn't preclude, again, the adjustments, the budget adjustments coming through in the subsequent years, but it would still be that 4-year horizon for planning for the service?
Yes, provided that the supplementary budget adjustments didn't reduce or change funding.
Of course, yeah. Okay, no, thank you. Then, I mean, just some questions around the reserve. And I'll ask a numbers question first in case, I'm just curious what the reserve did accumulate over the 6 years that the funding formula was in effect. And then just wondering too, to be frank, I feel that the reserve policy is actually incredibly directive. I mean, if we're considering considering the Police Act, that to me is more than any of the other options, very clearly specifying how money has to be allocated.
So I would say that the reserve fund was designed to operate similar to the financial stabilization reserve. And so what you see in terms of direction in the reserve policy, it ties to the main funding formula policy, and then it acts as a stabilization reserve. So to the extent that police run a deficit, council isn't required to fund that deficit. They must adjust their spending to, in the next year, to rid themselves, to bring that, to eliminate that deficit. And to the extent that they ran a surplus, they could use that surplus in accordance with anything that they wanted to do, provided the commission approved it.
So it would be the city holding back that funding, not telling the commission how to allocate that funding.
No, well, I would say like once it was in the reserve, it was the commission. So it was part of their funding envelope, and they could use it in the next year if they wanted to. But you would still have, like, through the commission, would still have oversight on how that reserve funding was spent.
But it was still required to, to be in the reserve, though.
And it would still come through the budget process.
I'm over time, Mr. Mayor, but thank you.
Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start with just some questions of the general questions on the motion here. So if we go to option one again, we go back to what we were back in the day. I remember those days well. The issue, I think, for relation to oversight is that while those plans and those packages are provided, again, I think it's talked about in the report, but I think there is no way for us to have any ability to hold the commission or the service to account if they choose to put forward a package and it's funded, and then they choose to redirect it to another area for potentially very valid reasons. But there's no control for us to do that, correct?
Is that directed at administration or the mover?
Sorry, I'll go to the administration. Sorry, thank you.
There's no direct way to do that. Once you've allocated the funding, the commission decides the allocation of funding. So your mechanism is indirect.
Yeah. So maybe this is a question.
But maybe just to add, Councillor Knack, I don't know of a circumstance where the commission in the past has come with a service package funded for a specific reason, approved by council, given to the commission, and then implemented for that reason. I just want to make it clear that it's not an automatic deduction that the police are going to use it for something else.
No,
every time they've come forward with a service package, they've used the funding that council and then the commission gave them to do what that service package was intended. So I just want to make that clear.
But to be clear, it hasn't happened all the time, right? So take, for example, our most recent conversation about downtown beat officers. I was on the council that approved a allocation of downtown beat officers that for a few years was there and then subsequently changed. And again, I'm not suggesting it wasn't valid, but there wasn't a mechanism for council to provide oversight on that decision. So we approved money for one thing, and then a few years later, it was then subsequently used for something else. So I guess my question is, maybe more to the commission, do you envision a way, is there a way to try to help make sure we can have a bit more of that conversation around if there needs to be a change? Again, there was likely a valid reason to change the number of beat officers in downtown, But I don't think that ever came to council when it changed as to here's why this specific change needs to happen. So any thoughts on how we do that if we went down this path versus formula approach?
I just want to be clear of your question. You're asking how it is possible for the council to influence the way the funds are allocated through the commission's approval to the service. Is that correct?
Not influence, but just be made aware of when changes are happening.
So the reports and the conversations that we currently have are not adequate? Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm out of time, so I think I'll have to come back. I don't want to abuse my time. I'll come back, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Rice?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. So the first question is about the comments my colleague, Councillor Stevens, made earlier about the increased percentage. I just want administration clarify and then to ensure that calculation is correct. And because my calculation and from the attachment 3 and specifically revised late operating requirement, and from 2019 to 2022, the increase is less than 1%. So that is very clearly mathematically and then demonstrated in attachment 3. So that is, I just want to make that clarification at the beginning. And then my next question. So our police funding, by looking at the number itself, and it looks like, yes, it's increased by this less than 1%. But compared to the population increase rate, and compared to the inflation rate increased, and compared to our efficiency factor considered in the process in the past 8 years, and I would like to say start 2016, and how could this be increased and this conclusion be draft? So I just want to put a question there, and I don't need an answer. I think this answer is very obvious. That's his first question. And the second question, and starting 2020 June, and we had that Safe for All strategy, and with the 14 recommendation actions implemented. After that implementation, I just want to ask, is there any indicators to indicate the lower demands for the police services? Is there any indicator there? You're muted.
No, I can take that, Councillor. Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Perfect. So actually tomorrow at the Police Commission, you'll be seeing a presentation on our help team, which is a combination of working with social providers, or social navigators and social partners, and police officers. We now, through evaluation of it, this is going to be our 1-year evaluation, are able to show that by virtue of doing this and diverting people from the justice system, we are empirically reducing demand on calls for service and interactions with the police.
My real question, I think my time is out. I come back next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Let's see, any other council committee members? No, Councillor Salvador.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. So I wanted to ask about just reference to something that was said in the report, just around the importance of considering EPS as part of the overall community safety and well-being ecosystem and objectives, and that we shouldn't be deciding on EPS funding as an isolated discussion. So by having a funding formula in and of itself, I guess I'm trying to understand how that fits in with our goals of having sort of an integrated ecosystem approach. It just seems that EPS funding is inherently isolated from that larger conversation. So how is our approach to budgeting and governance reflective of that goal of interrelationship and interdependence?
So when we make that comment in the report, we're talking about where you start the funding formula from. So it's important in establishing the base budget to look at that from an integrated basis. The intention with the formula was once you made that decision, then this was a reasonable basis to adjust that formula on the basis of both statistical information and data and perhaps an efficiency factor and any other number of things that you might like in a revised formula. And we're only talking about EPS here, but nothing precludes you from doing the same thing on the community safety and well-being side.
Okay. Okay, and I guess just on that note, like when it comes to that larger conversation around community safety and well-being, to Mr. Corbould, has there been contemplation of that? Recognizing like policing is one part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think as we talked about the other day, what we want to do is spend the next several months putting a much more integrated budget for community safety and well-being together for the 4-year budget. But I think the answer on option 1 or 2 here won't change our ability to do that. So, several of our own departments are, funded in different ways as well. And then especially given the need to understand what the province is doing, who are also funded differently, and understand what the social agencies are doing, who are also funded differently on different models.
Right.
We can't have an overall model given the involvement of all those different agencies and orders of government. But I don't think that matters. I think the point is we'll have a strategy if council approves it next week, and everybody can work within their whatever funding formula works best for their organizations to make that come together.
Right. Okay. So not dependent on. Okay. Great.
Correct.
And then also wanted to ask a question about the efficiency factor as well. Just the last few seconds here. So recognizing the efficiency factor is the amount that's expected to be saved annually through learning and the adoption of more efficient operational practices. I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to have, I don't have a name for it, but something like a diversion or detasking factor in recognition that we are trying to, reduce those calls for service and overall achieve efficiencies in, does that make sense? Do you get where I'm going?
I think the intention with a revised funding formula, because I think our recommendation was that that administration, the commission, and EPS would work together to design it, that could be one factor that is included in a revised funding formula.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Salvador. Councillor Cardinal.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. So I just want to sort of disaggregate this conversation, or the part of the motion that says align with the existing civic department processes. So I might move a motion that says bring back an unfunded service package to increase the number of lifeguards at swimming pools. And that's unfunded, and it comes to council sometime in the 23 to 26 budget. Fair so far?
Yes,
that's
Councilor.
our process.
Yeah.
Right? And I say I really think we need it, and somebody else says I think we're meeting all of the right regulatory needs for lifeguards. We hash it out. We decide whether or not to add money to the budget to hire more lifeguards.
Correct.
In this process, the police service is going to say, we need a service package for X, more officers, something. And it's going to go to the police commission. And the police commission is going to say yay or nay. And if they say yay, then the police commission is going to come to council, like any of the civic departments do, and say, council, we would like approval for service package X that the police service would like us to fund. Is not in essence city council governing the budget of the police service through an intermediary?
In essence, yeah, I mean, I think it's legal.
But that's my question. Is it legal?
Well, I think I'll let the lawyers talk about that. But you're right. It's exercising a level of control more than I think what's contemplated in this current system.
To me, it's analogous to saying that school boards control where schools are built, except they don't. It sounds like the police commission is in charge of the budget, except they're not. And I even though there's an intermediary, I think if that is the budgeting process, I don't know that to me does not align with separation of council from directing the police service.
We flag that as a risk, right? That is one of the downfalls of option number 1 is that is perceived differently by different people.
Okay. So I've stated my concerns there. When do we get the Police Act review report? Do we know when that's due?
I have no idea. I don't know if anybody in the commission does.
Anybody
No,
have a
we
sense
have
of
no idea.
Okay. Because I think that,
Actually, Councillor, it's Catherine. I just sent a memo off to council reminding them that we should be getting an update sometime in June on this matter. So your question is timely.
thank you. Sorry, it's been a long time since I looked at my emails. I've been in this room since 8 o'clock Monday morning. Would that report not have some impact on everything we're talking about today?
Yes, I think that's a fair possibility.
So is there a risk that we're going to repeat this conversation after we get the Police Act report? To some degree.
I think that risk is probably there no matter what option council chooses.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Councillor Tang.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, apologies. I think my questions are big granular just to help me understand. And coming back to this efficiency factor, so in the report said 2019 to 2022, it was 1%. So does that mean every year there's a 1% decrease in the funding? Is that correct? Ms. Padbury?
So, yeah, so council decided for 2019 to 2022, the efficiency factor would go from 0.5% to 1%. So the way that funding formula works is base budget times population increase times inflation less 1%.
Okay. And how do we know if we achieved efficiency? Or is it more just this is there to drive efficiency?
The formula drives efficiency. You would know if efficiency was achieved based on how the commission and the service report back.
Okay, thank you. And then the police index rate, AKA the inflation, what's the inflation rate increase since 2019 every year?
Councillor Tang, so I can give you where the actuals are from 2019 to 2022, including some forecasts. So the police price index was 0.52% in 2019, 0.96% in 2020, 1.95% in 2021, and forecasting 1.52% for 2022.
Okay,
that's the
even though we're at an all-time inflation high, hey?
So just to be clear, that's what was set in the, it was set in the formula in 2019 to 2022.
Okay.
And that's the actual experience to date.
Okay.
By year.
Okay, got it. And I guess I just another, I think this is a bit of a small question, but on attachment 3, column B for this year, I just want to clarify, shouldn't that be 5.5 or is that supposed to be cumulative?
So Councillor Tang, on attachment 3, column B there, so that's $5.5 million. So it was $11 million total removed from the base, split over 2021 and 2022. So council removed 5.5 million in 2021 and then an additional 5.5 million in 2022. So that's why you're seeing that 11 million. It's a compounding number.
Compounding, gotcha. Okay. And I have a couple of final questions about the reserve itself, but I'll come back for my final round. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Councillor Jans.
Thank you. Very quickly to the movers. So if the photo radar fund, the automated enforcement reserve, or that revenue never came through, if the province doesn't make change to the legislation, where would the city of Edmonton find the money? I guess we don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Councillor, the first.
Can I ask the mover?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, if legislation doesn't change, we're not going to have that automated enforcement funding. So where would we find the money?
This takes that money out.
So
This motion says 385, which is our tax base, our current tax base, minus the 21 million that we have for community social safety and well-being. that we're allocating on an ongoing basis, minus the traffic thing. So this 385 is just tax base. It doesn't touch that traffic enforcement fund. Now, potentially based on this motion, and after we have further conversations, there may be opportunity to say, in context of all the other things we're prioritizing, yes, we do actually want, 15 million of the traffic enforcement budget to go towards police, but that's the conversation we can have in
That's interesting. So the police would then have a vested interest also in seeing favorable legislation towards automated enforcement, not only for traffic, but maybe for like noisy motorcycles or other vehicles too.
I can't speak to their motivation.
That's
but
interesting.
But this is really, from a dollars and cents perspective, the most honest we can be with the commission and with EPS and with the public, quite frankly, about where we are fiscally and where we want to start from. And that start point is zero. I've heard that from my constituents multiple times.
If I may, sorry, that would be, if not, what's it, a 1.5% tax increase or something like that. So I hear you there. I was wondering if the chair of the commission could, you may not have it handy now, but if we can get a report to council. I'm interested in how many communications, public relations, of the 800 non-badge and guns, how many communications PR people does the service or the commission have internally, and how much is being spent on external government relations firms, lobbyists, campaigns, etc. That would be very helpful, including providers if possible. Where I'm going with this is I think we need to work together as council, as commission, as service on this Police Act reform. I envision a joint letter from the mayor and the chief and the chair saying we need Police Act reform now. It's been very clear through this conversation today that all of us are hampered by inadequate, outdated legislation that we all need to move quickly on. We heard Alex, she said, we got to move away from massive police budgets eventually, and judging by our tax increase of 8.5% eventually might be tomorrow. So just wondering if we could look to the commission chair to get that information.
Thank you, Councillor. If you'd like to share, send us what your ask is. I'm sure we'd be more than happy to provide you a response to that. And to your point of substantial property tax increase and a cut to the service, I'm not sure how well received that would be by the citizens that are looking to be well looked after, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jens. Councillor Hamilton?
Sorry, I wasn't aware I was up so soon. So I'm looking for some clarification because my understanding of the report today, Mr. Corbould, was that we were here to discuss methodology, not necessarily sort of amounts. Could you clarify that for me, what the purpose of today's report was?
Yeah, from administration's perspective, the intent was to provide council with what are the options to fund a police force, which is what we were asked to do, which we've done. We don't need a baseline decision today. That wasn't what we were searching for. But what we were trying to do is demonstrate the three different models, say that they're all possible, and then we recommended one, which is a funding formula. Our thought was originally that you would have time then, having decided formula, that we could then, over the next 3 to 4 months, discuss levels within a formula. And I think what the motion does is say, well, let's talk about levels first and then continue to, but also identify which option. So, but our intent was to just get clarity on which option we thought was best and get guidance on that to then go ahead and fund it.
That was my understanding as well. And I appreciate the enthusiasm to get to levels first. But I'm wondering if there is an unintended consequence to establishing those levels this early in the budget year.
Is that to the administration or to the mover? I just want to make sure.
To administration.
Yeah.
Are there any unintended consequences here that we're not aware of in terms of establishing levels first?
I would say I just don't know at this point, but I also think the mover was clear in terms of, that didn't mean, we couldn't have other conversations between now and fall budget. That was clear to me as well. So, but we certainly did not come here today to be prepared to sort of answer questions about levels, I would say, but, yeah.
All right, and I guess, I'm concerned the police commission has not weighed in on that base number adequately at this point, and I don't know if anyone from the police commission or the service can speak to that quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I'll make it as quick as possible. At first blush, it looks like about a $22 million cut. That's the least of my concerns. My concern is this is council arbitrarily assigning a number to the police budget. I doubt very much that you would fund your snow clearing nor your fire rescue service without a business plan and without a wholesome discussion around what numbers, after reviewing our plan, our strategic goals, bringing them to council for a read, and then presenting our budget. Arbitrarily assigning a number to the police budget cuts the legs out from underneath the commission, and it is usurping our role. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I would need some clarification from administration, because I will need to make a determination on this motion in a way that when I look at the report, I'm just trying to find the report attachment. I think it's the first where the recommendation is. If I go into the executive summary, right at the top, bullet number 4, or that says, once the base funding amount for EPS is determined, administration recommends the revised funding formula be developed for EPS and implemented to provide predictability to the EPS. So you asked for a base funding amount to be determined. And I'm hearing something different from administration, that's not what you asked for.
So I think what we're asking for is determine the methodology, business as usual, funding formula, and then once you determine that, you need to determine the base budget to start the formula from, and we would work in the interim with the commission and the police to bring back a formula on which to develop the base. I don't think we intended to preclude any discussion on what that base amount would be, but it is not required at the moment.
Good. Thank you for clarifying that point, because that's not what I understood. Okay, that's good, and I'll come just to need the clarification. So that, and I'll go to Councillor. Oh, we are at 3:33. Okay, we'll take a break here, then come back for the questions.
Good afternoon. We are live from council chamber.
Good afternoon, everyone. Would like to bring this meeting back to order. And we'll do a quick roll call. Councillor Wright.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Knack.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Principe.
Hello.
Councillor Stevenson.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Paquette.
I'm here.
Councillor Tang. Councillor Hamilton.
Hello, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Tang is there. Councillor Hamilton.
Hello.
Councillor Rutherford.
Hello.
Councillor Salvador.
Hello.
Councillor Cartmel. He'll be in shortly. Councillor Rice.
Here.
Councillor Jans.
Good afternoon.
All right, and next person in the line is Councillor Paquette. No, Councillor Wright is next? Oh, Councillor Wright, you are next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess my question is to the mover. I just had some clarification, I guess, around that sort of setting that base at the 385. So in the report that we received, that would be to then move to option 2, the funding formula, or is it to freeze the base as per option 3? Or because you're looking at it at the operating budget, is it option 1? Like, what's that starting point, I guess?
Yeah, so the intention is that base, and to give, I know that it's mentioned that that decision was not needed today, but I think it's important to move the other items forward. And so I have a base, and then option 1 is really what this is intended to.
Okay, so combination. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much. And then I just have a question in regards to the concern around the Police Act. So I'm not sure who can answer this for me. Has the Police Act changed since it was done, since option 1 was done previously? Putting it in the full budget cycle? I'm just wondering why the concern now with that.
There haven't been changes in the Police Act that would be substantial to warrant that change. I would just say, looking back, what we flagged in the report is the risk that is not perceived to be the intention.
Okay, so it was okay before, so it should be okay now, right? And it's not that we're directing the police service, it's so that the commission can come forward to us to request the budget, right?
Option 1 would be council is deciding on the overall funding for EPS on the basis of a budgetary process where they come forward like any other department.
Through the commission?
Yes, so the commission brings forward the budget.
Okay, so then the commission still maintains their oversight and can provide transparency and everything as far as what the request's for, correct?
Correct, that was previously part of the process and would be part of the process going forward.
Okay, great, thank you very much. And then the other question that I had was in regards to adjustments, I guess throughout the four-year cycle. That has been the process in the past, and it's okay to continue that as well. Has that ever been perceived as, I guess, maybe as political or that we're directing the police?
So in the previous cycles, I would like when we did what is now option 1 before, in the previous, so first of all, we only did it for a few years because we haven't always done multi-year budgeting. So prior to 2016, the city didn't do multi-year budgeting. It did annual budgeting. So much less of an issue with the mid-year adjustments or the twice-year supplementary budget adjustments. When we moved to a 4-year, we moved to a formula at the same time we were moving to a 4-year cycle.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wright.
In both those options.
That's it, Councillor Wright. Sorry, okay. That's it. Councillor Paquette.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in January, I had a sort of a systems and ecosystem audit proposed. It never went through, which is very frustrating because it would have added to this conversation. In fact, maybe made this conversation moot. Are we getting that information in some other way? Like, I understand it'll be piecemeal, but the data that audit was going to provide for us and the direction, are we going to get that in some other way?
Sorry, is that for admin?
Sure. Yeah.
I think what I understood at the time is that the commission would do some work on that, so I might defer to the commission.
Okay, yeah, because it is in the Police Act that in developing a budget, a council may obtain any information from the commission that may be necessary to able it to assess the efficiency, I believe the wording is, and financial requirements of the police service. Yeah, so it is well within council's right to ask for that information and to receive it in order to help make these budget decisions. So, and what we're talking about, the larger ecosystem at this point, police budget being part of it. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, and I think that's a thing we saw sort of transpiring between now and the fall budget cycle.
Yeah, okay. So I would say that because the Police Act review has not been made public yet, that maybe any decision points may be a bit premature. I'm happy to receive this for information, but I'm not sure, in the absence of more complete information, if we should be voting on any motions about funding at this time. Thoughts on that? Mr. Corporal?
I would say that was the intent of bringing the report forward. That's what we said when we brought the report forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll respond to council's direction.
I just feel like there are way too many gaps in our knowledge. Hopefully those are coming to the Police Commission. I understand you have your own audit underway, and those results will be made available to council sooner than later. Is that right?
Any ask that you provide to the commission, would be more than happy to supply to council.
Okay. All right, and I think because we were in private, I can't ask too much about the decision for that audit not going forward, but it remains a very, very sincere frustration on my part. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Constable Paquette. Let me see if everybody had a second round. I do have a couple of questions I'll go to Commission Chair. So when I look at the overall budget for police from tax levy from 2019 to 2022, it has increased by $28 million. So am I correct in that?
For the correct numbers, Mr. Mayor, I'd have to refer that to the finance people at the service.
I'm just looking at the presentation that was given to us today. Based on that, in 2019 police budget from tax levy was $356 million, in 2020 to 384.9. So I think this characterization that police budget has decreased over the last 2 to 3 years, in my mind, is not the correct characterization. Second question is related to province's decision to take a larger share of the fine revenues. I think it went from 39 to 50%. Maybe that is to the service. Has there been any advocacy done to the province by the commission that why are they taking a larger share of the fine revenue that indirectly impacts the police budget?
We certainly, as behalf of police service,
we've sent some questions to the Alberta Association of Police Governance, who sent a letter off to the provincial government, but that's a provincial decision. That's out of the bailiwick of the commission.
Okay, so you don't feel that you have the ability to advocate on behalf of this service?
We have sent letters forward as a resolution to the annual general meeting.
Okay.
So they have been received and communicated, and I have no feedback from those resolutions.
Okay, good. And is our police budget comparable to Calgary's police budget per capita?
Again, I think that's not a fair question to compare city to city. We can't compare apples to, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Okay, because they might be doing things that we are not doing, or we are doing things that they are not doing.
And we're spending money where they're not, and they're not spending money where we are. So it's a very difficult comparison. I appreciate that it would be very convenient if we could do that, but the items in the basket that we're counting are significantly different, and some items are not included in that basket here where they are elsewhere.
Okay, because that will create, like, then how would Police Act determines then if there are variances in funding from service to service, and Police Act says we are not funding our service adequately, then how would they make that determination? Just trying to understand that aspect. That's why I wanted to ask those questions.
Maybe I can help answer that.
Yeah.
Part of what I had explained before in our corporate performance framework, we actually have 4 pillars that we align to the Canadian Police performance metrics, which is in line with Stats Can. And that is where we can look at what other police organizations are doing and look at how we compare in terms of the things that we track, like nonviolent crime, violent crime, like that is where you're going to get.
So that's where the comparison actually, okay, got it, good. All right, I'm out of time. 3 minutes passed so quick. I'll go back to committee members. Councillor Rice, you're next.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I had a same question, and then with Councillor Catmull and Councillor Hamilton asked, so that's already answered. So I don't have too many questions at this point. I do want to focus on the purpose of today's meeting, and then put the focus and the time, and then to consider and how we can move forward. So I do have a motion, and I don't know what's the process. Maybe city clerk and I can clarify, and then when is a better time for me to put that motion on the floor?
So my understanding that we would have to vote on this motion first, because this is on the floor. And once we deal with that, then you can put your motion forward, Councillor Rice, or unless you want to make amendments to this.
No, it's not amendments.
Am I right in that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And if you would like to amend the motion that's on the floor, we can do that, but a new motion would have to wait for us to vote on this motion.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's considered amendment or not, and I can speak out. And
Yeah, please, yeah,
then you you can make that call, and the chair. And so I do want to move the recommendation from our administration and back to the council, and for the further discussion. So that is the motion. Do I need to read all the words? Do I need to read all words?
So that would not be amendment, I'm understanding.
Yeah.
That will be a different motion. So that probably won't be an amendment to this, what is on the floor.
Okay, so I still have a little bit of time.
I'll give you more time, don't worry about that.
Yeah, so I still have a little bit of time. I do want to say, yes, this decision is not an easy decision. Not only not easy for council or commission or EPS, and also is not easy for our Edmontonians as well, because this is strongly related to our Edmontonians. How do they feel to live in our city? And it's strongly related back to our business, how they feel to do the investments and then to do the business in our city as well. And then with that say, and this decision, we need to consider, and from that perspective, not only our city council and commission, EPS, and we need to look at what is really needs from our public as well. And then I do respect our administration's professional recommendation at this point, and with the Police Act under review, and I think we should move forward with their recommendation, and then to have that conductive discussion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thank you. Just really wanted to tease out again the question of jurisdiction. So, my understanding of the Police Act is that setting the I'm going back to pies, but setting the overall budget is very much council's purview. Is that correct? The total dollar amount?
Yes, that's our understanding.
Okay, and then the concern is that with service packages, it is funding for specific services, which could be seen as directing what those services are. Is that correct?
That is likely where the cloudiness comes in.
Okay, even though once we approve a service package, we are ultimately only approving the dollar figure.
Correct. You ultimately approve the whole envelope. Once the envelope's approved, the commission decides how that allocation happens, and they can make decisions throughout the year to adjust.
Yeah, and this may be a strange question, but I know that the service packages that come forward from other civic departments have a great deal of specificity. Are there other ways that you think service packages could come forward from the commission that maybe have a slightly different format or that might help alleviate that risk?
Yeah, I think we'd have to think about it.
Sure.
I think there's likely a way that you could do that.
Okay. So then maybe just to the mover, I just wanted to go back to a point. I also think that, setting that baseline budget is, really, we do need a lot of information to do that effectively. But I think what I heard you say is that your motion today is not intended to preclude changes to that number, that you're very open through the budgeting process when we have this additional information, that number could very well change. This is just providing an initial starting point. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I wanted to be, it takes a lot of courage to put that out there, but I felt like for the public, for the commission, it was important to be transparent about where the starting place is, and that starting place is what is our tax levy. Like, it's not a number I'm just pulling out of nowhere. But then, like I said, I also don't preclude that they're going to come back with, granular service packages. I think that the goal is that they come back to us and that, as it says in this motion, in the 4-year budgeting process and say what they need to do the work, and we assess that in juxtaposition. But this is the bare minimum we're saying that the police would be funded.
Okay. So then maybe just to Chair McDougall, recognizing again that this number can shift, that the commission can come forward with different a different budget request as part of the 4-year cycle. Does the number provide a useful starting point for your conversations?
Thank you, Councillor. Again, my concern rests that the number is being drawn from a well-thought-out process, Councillor Rutherford. However, that's being done without any consultation. There's been no discussion of our business plan, of our direction, of what the expectation of the commission role of the service is going to be, and what we see as policing priorities and what funding is going to get assigned to that. Even with this number, it's about again, round figures, $22 million. That's about 115 officers. That cut would result in approximately 115. There's a lot of variables that go into that, but that's about 115 officer cut. So I would say it would be well-meaning but misguided to make those decisions without seeing what the business plan is and how that business plan ties into our strategic plan and our strategic goals.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. And next, I will go to Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I think I'll pick up on that. So, I think that this is actually an opportunity to the chair in terms of being able to come back with that business case for the 4-year budget and get that process. And I think it would be actually very interesting to see, hearing that the police have never done that full 4-year budget cycle, to see if that does create predictability, what that does look like. I'm struggling to understand the concern of this being the base. This is the base, this isn't the budget. There's a difference. So I guess I'm trying to understand that, the concern.
I appreciate that. I think any time that we have council saying that this is where we start, that still crosses that gray zone of usurping what we do. I appreciate that you need to sort of have a starting point, but I don't think that starting point should be done in isolation. That's my take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I'm just coming up on time, right? Like, I'm just trying to think about the timelines. If we're supposed to go today and say, okay, we'll do the second part, but the report says we need to create a baseline for administration to go away, and whether it was option 1, 2, or 3, we were supposed to, as a council, make the decision on the baseline. So if I feel like often we're just punting and delaying these decisions, which isn't fair to the commission, it's not fair to the public, it's not fair to EPS, and it's not fair to council or administration as well. So my goal here is to, just to start to not delay and belabor these decisions and so I guess I'm not seeing the concern, but I'm trying to understand the concern around that, because wouldn't it be more harmful to leave this meeting with complete uncertainty of whether we're going up or down?
From my perspective, I would say the greater concern is city telling the service how much money they're getting versus having some meaningful discussion to come to that number.
But that will happen in the fall.
That will happen over our discussions over the summer when we sit with the service and discuss how that's going to roll out.
Yeah, and then you'll bring that proposed amount.
Correct.
In the fall.
Correct.
For discussion with council.
Correct.
Okay.
But that's done after discussions about what is the best way forward given our strategic plan.
Yeah.
It's not done with, here's something to start with, now go. It's
But we
here's
can't
what
make that, but you have to think about the tax base as your starting point. Do you not, as a commission, think about what currently the city has in terms of ongoing tax base funding for police?
We would have that, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Tang?
Great, thank you so much. I certainly do have thoughts on the motion on the table, but I just want to finish my rounds of questions. I'll try to be quick. Back to the jurisdictional scan, do we have a sense, since no other municipality has implemented a formal funding formula policy, do we have a sense for some of these municipalities, are they better off, are they worse off? I guess to Mr. Coble.
Well, I just go back to why we instituted the policy in the first place, and I think overall the municipality is better off with the funding formula based on the reasons we've explained in the report.
Great, thank you. And then for the reserve, it's currently in deficit, right? Is it in a deficit?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor Tang. It's in a deficit balance as
And
of,
then
as of the end of the year.
So if it falls into the deficit position, then a strategy will be developed to achieve that balance position. Where is that at currently? Is there something in development or?
So I'll maybe just say that one of the nuance here is you suspended the funding formula.
I see.
The funding formula and the reserve policy are linked.
Right.
I don't think that you can go with option 1 without removing the police funding. Sorry, the reserve policy.
Okay.
Those were meant to work in tandem.
Gotcha. Okay, so I don't think I was caught that. So option 1 would effectively remove the reserve policy, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we would have to repeal the police funding formula reserve, and we would repeal at the same time the reserve policy, because the reserve was designed to work with the funding formula.
And so if option 2, in terms of a revised funding formula, that will not affect the reserve policy. Is that right?
That's correct. You would redesign the policy, and you may make some updates to the reserve policy on the basis of a revised funding formula policy. but
Yeah.
we would anticipate that there would still be a need for a reserve policy.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that that is an important piece. I guess just in my last few seconds, I understand where this is coming from. I appreciate that the 285 starting point is not coming out of nowhere. In fact, I actually think it aligns with the current policy. Just starting on the previous year's net operating requirement. And aside from some of the governance overreach concerns already cited, and while it's legal, but I think as administration pointed out in the report, it's about how it's being perceived. I also feel that the formula doesn't have to be unsustainable where increases happen uncontrollably. Well, I'm out of time, but I guess all that to say, I think there's a lot out of some of the other options that will answer a lot of the questions that we've been having conversations all day on. And so I'm not on the committee, obviously, but I will hesitate to support option 1 as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Councillor Cardmell.
Thank you. So you've heard my concerns about whether this, for lack of a better phrase, is legal or not. And you've heard some of my colleagues try to express some form of rationalization as why it could be or should be or could be considered to be. Can we bring a legal review of this? The motion says that this is recommended to council, so it's coming next week to council. Can that be accompanied by some sort of legal evaluation of some further legal work?
See if Ms. Poof wants to answer that, because she's done a look at that.
I think she actually had to depart the meeting, and
Oh.
to be perfectly frank, I checked that with her before she left.
Yeah,
so.
Councillor Cartmel, I talked to her also before she left at the break, and we would have time to bring back a legal review of the formula sometime late next week or before the next council meeting. Maybe not the next council meeting, but
Soon, relatively soon.
yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So I don't know that we can make a decision on the motion on the floor at council without that legal advice, I would suggest. I would like it.
Yeah, and Ms. Jacobson is on the line if she wanted to clarify anything.
Well, it's enough. Sorry, I've got a few other questions and time's a wasting. Sorry. This is fun with numbers, these budget conversations, right? We've heard the slide says, forget what number it is, $21.9 million reduction. From the perspective of, in 2019, a budget was laid out, the police service was told what to expect. Now what they're getting is different than what they were told to expect. That's a reduction.
We reduced the approved budget.
And Mayor Sohi talks about what the actual budget numbers were and how they've gone up. They've gone up 5%. Population's gone up 8%, according to the Alberta website. We heard from Snow and Ice that the inventory of roads has gone up 21%. That implies that the city is bigger. It's fun with numbers. It's fun with numbers. And to Chair McDougall's point, what do we need to run a police service? And they would like that opportunity to present that before we land on a number. Certainly it's going to be related to some of these numbers, but in the circumstances presented to us today, in the most conservative evaluation of this, if the number is crystallized at 385 and does not go up because council does not approve a service package to increase it, that is a collective $44 million reduction in 3 years of the expected approved budget. That is a reduction in budgets, because that's what budgets are, allocations of dollars, and they're being reduced. I think we should bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartmel. Councillor Jans.
I think sometimes sitting here as a councillor, and I get this a lot from members of the public, concern about we get a lot of verbal reports, especially when it comes to police. We get a lot of walk-on reports. We get data in isolation. I'm wondering, I guess I hear terms like, oh, we have flare-ups, or there's some bad guys, or we're often missing the data that we can use to actually make decisions. I think it was really illuminating that we saw that a fraction of the officers our downtown compared to the number of calls downtown and the implications that we have. We've had a number of other calls about transit, and I'm wondering, because we hear crime is going down, but population's going up, but crime is going down. So what are we actually funding here? And I also hear an incongruence that it's impossible. Edmonton is so unique. It's like one hair on your head. You cannot possibly compare it to another municipality or place in the world when looking at crime figures and data and stats here. And I feel like there's academic disciplines that must study these things. So maybe we could get some thought around that. But I guess to the mover, I hear your point about some fiscal discipline, some scrutiny, the pressure that we're facing. What data do you need to move on that 385? I hear from some that it's still 32% of the work included is not police work. That's from the Safe for All report, which police were a member of. There were police officers part of that whole exercise. It was collaborative until the end. So, what info would you like supplemented? Because I have a list.
Question.
I'm asking the mover.
I personally don't need any further information. I'm not really understanding my colleagues' concern about making this decision today, because as I've mentioned, this is the starting point of the conversation, not the finish of the conversation. And so I think that gives us from now until December to have those conversations and to get that information.
And if I'm thinking as well about, the businesses we've heard from over and over about predictability of taxation. If we're going to have a funding formula for the police, I think we may need to look at a multi-year property tax funding formula then too. Because what I hear today is that if we're at 8.5, if the police think this is insufficient and we need to make up at least another 25 million, add on another 2 or 3%. So maybe we just have to go to Edmontonians and say, based on the feedback from administration and the police, we're sitting at 11%, and it's only going to go up for the next few years because of the police funding formula at a bare minimum. Like maybe we need to have that conversation too, and I don't look forward to that, but yeah. Sorry, I'm out of time.
You're out of time, Councillor Jans, and you only ask one question in 3 minutes. Right, so. Councillor Salvador?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on some questions just around the importance of having that evidence and data. And I guess I would like to know, what is the role of the commission in providing that data to help inform these discussions and these decisions?
Yeah, maybe I'll start, Councillor, by saying it's pretty clear that Council can ask any questions and information it wants of the Commission to help make their funding decisions. And I think just looking to see if the Chair of the Commission would agree with that. I think, and he's certainly willing to respond to those kind of detailed questions.
We have really robust reports that we get from the service. And that's everything from use of force to deployment models. Every report that we get from the service is available on our commission website.
And I guess I would just ask, is that data reflective of the type of metrics that we want to measure holistically, community safety and well-being in our city?
I think I'd like to turn that over to the community safety and well-being, Mr. Oker over there, please.
And thank you for the question, Councillor. I guess it would depend on what metrics you're looking for. If we have determined as a city that we are looking to divert vulnerable people who should not be in the justice system away from the justice system and continued recontact with police, I can give you those metrics. They'll be here tomorrow at the Police Commission.
Okay.
I think, just on to, there's the other side of this too, and Councillor Jansky's referring to it, but we also got significant stats on homicides, gangs, etc. on the other side. So it's not just a one or the other in Edmonton. We have both issues, and we track them all, and we have focused efforts in both sides. So there's lots of data.
And Ashley, this is Commissioner Callahoo Stonehouse. Many times when the service provides us reports, there's commissioners like myself that ask for trends in data. So they may be presenting on the past 2 months, but I will ask, let's say, for example, for the past 5 years, I want to see the trends. I want to see what kinds of questions, complaints are coming in. Whatever the service provides us, we interrogate and want to explore the trends, the implications, and the outcomes for Edmontonians.
You also have 2 counselors on the commission as well that can feed that information back.
Okay, thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador Costa-Paquette.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just to speak to the motion.
Okay, good, thank you. Just a couple of questions, Commission Chair. One of the lesser reliable funding source is becoming more and more lesser reliable now, the photo radar revenue, because of the changes and the now at this time it's about $22.3 million. So when you come back with options, you have if this passes, you have a secure $385 million base level funding, but you can come back with options to give you more secure funding source through a tax levy instead of a photo radar revenue, which is becoming more volatile. Does that give you that option?
I think the starting number shouldn't be based off the tax base.
Okay.
The starting number should be based off what is safe, efficient, and effective for the city.
So which could be what you get now, which is 385 plus $22 million?
I think that number would be determined in discussions with the service and the commission.
So, but I'm just trying to understand the parameters. Like, I think every department could come up with all the things they want to have, but there are limitations what taxpayers can pay. Right? So I just don't know, what is the constraint then? What is the constraint for commission to come back to us? You could come with maybe, so what parameters you would follow then if there's no parameter given?
Again, I think the parameters shouldn't be necessarily based off of that tax base. It's the services that we provide now, what our initiatives are going forward, that's what the base should be off of, not just saying here is what the city is saying you should use.
I'm still trying to, I understand that 385 is tax levy, but then there's what I'm trying to understand, there's nothing restrict you coming back with options for additional funding based on the priorities that you would identify in working with service for the budget, during the budget discussion. What is restricting your ability to do that based on this motion?
There's nothing restricting us from taking a $400 million budget back and using that as our starting point. I just want to ensure that the numbers that we're using as a starting point aren't based off of a tax base. It needs to be based off something that is relevant and important to the policing aspect of that. So again, it has to be a number that we sit collectively to discuss. This is where we want to start. And once we have that start point, then we can build on that as we go through the budget process.
Yeah, but we need to give some certainty in a way that you don't come back with $500 million ask.
So I would like to think that you would expect your commission to be more responsible.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand.
That we would not make some number up out of the air and come back and be unreasonable. I think we as citizens and representatives of the citizens would be much more responsible than that, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Thank you for that. That concludes the question to the to administration, and he's to speak. He's to speak on this, right? So. You are speaking to it as well. I'm just seeing the.
I know, but I'm still.
I'm just waiting for the list to populate. And now people are lining up to speak, right? Or there's further questions? My understanding of questions are concluded now, right? Okay, Councillor, I'll go to committee first. Councillor Stevenson.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate the mover putting this forward. Just listening really carefully to the conversation this afternoon, I do certainly hear concerns and the true need to make informed decisions that are aligned with business planning. And through the questions that we've had, I don't feel that this motion precludes that in any way, and I think provides a starting point which can be useful. So yeah, I think this approach allows us to have that really robust conversation as part of the fall budget process, when we'll have a business plan where we'll have a budget request from the commission that allows us to consider all of the asks that will be made of our tax levy, which we know this year will be considerable. I think also what I heard too is just the need for more transparency, for more public understanding about how the budget is allocated and how those decisions are made. And in terms of being a conduit of information, it's very challenging because a lot of the information we receive is in private, wearing a commissioner's hat. So I hope that this is an opportunity to have those more public conversations, to provide that clarity, and look forward to supporting this motion and the work going ahead. Thank you. Thanks again to the mover.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think earlier today, one of my colleagues had asked what makes these conversations so challenging. And I think that the challenge is that, at least I found this after 8.5 years of doing this, that anytime there are any questions or scrutiny on how this budget is being spent, and I think even when it's asked in a non-combative way, we can often be accused.
Councillor Knack, we lost you. Lost the connection. We'll come back to you. And this happened yesterday too, right? So I'll go to Councillor Paquette.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so personally, I feel that we have this conversation in the wrong way. I think that's probably what Councillor Knack was going to say as well. It's obvious to me that we should determine what outcomes we want to see regarding prevention, diversion, and reduction. What does that look like when we work collaboratively with helping organizations as well? So if the goal is community safety, and it is, then we need everyone involved. So after that, what do? You determine what areas need the most attention or will give us the most return on investment the fastest and build on that, creating a work plan that eventually addresses every point of concern in the appropriate order of priority. For example, whether it's statistically real, but experientially real, people feel that downtown and LRT are not safe. So we should address those things as an example. There are enormous amounts of issues dealing with houselessness, with addictions, with mental health. Those things should be addressed very, very quickly and appropriately. We should fund these areas. Now, that may mean actually increasing budgets in the short term and partnering with all levels of government to address the roots of issues. And it may also take time. So as that work is underway, how do we best approach the current issues, the resulting branches springing from the roots of what we can identify as the causes of our problems, right? How do we properly fund that? And once we determine these areas of concern, then we can settle on appropriate funding as required by the Police Act, but also as required by the will of the public. Why we're not having these conversations in a dispassionate, depoliticized, calm and mature fashion, I cannot tell you. I am constantly surprised. In my opinion, it's the worst side of politics showing up, and we see it played out in social media again and again and again. It does not serve the public. Now, I think every single person involved in this conversation today agrees that we have to address all of these things and we have to do it in the most appropriate fashion. We should not be running off to media. No one in this room, not one single person, should be running off to media and causing discomfort among the public over what should be a rational and calm conversation that leads to the benefit of the public. So for that reason, I think that this motion right now is a little bit premature. There's more information that is going to inform where we go, and this motion may actually end up being moot once we get the review of the Police Act back, and once we get the result of the Commission's own audit. So I say let's wait. Let's have these calm discussions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. Councillor Knack, go ahead. I'll start your clock again.
Thank you. I just left off that I was saying that even when we're asking some of these questions, even in a non-competitive way, I can find we often get accused of being anti-police or unreasonable, and there's that tension that exists. And I have some of the lumps to prove that. I remember in 2014 when I even asked some basic questions about the police helicopter. And again, in 2018, I had brought forward a proposal to increase the police budget by about 32 million instead of the 87 million. The anger that came forward from many different folks, members of the public, a lot of different people, gosh, members of city council at that time, it was hard to deal with. And unfortunately, I think a little bit to what Councillor Paquette said, I think we noticed that again a bit today. I'm not sure that every part of the conversation today has been constructive as we would have liked, and I get that this is a sensitive topic, but I don't think performing our due diligence is unreasonable, especially when we do that type of work on every other line item. I didn't support the motion to reduce the planned increase for 2022. And I was really surprised even today to get some pushback around asking for comparable information. I genuinely, and I mean this, I wasn't looking to be difficult, but I think it's important to recognize that we actually have that ability as a council. I think it's section 29(2) of the Police Act that says, in developing a budget, the council may obtain any information from the commission that may be necessary to enable it to assess the efficiency and financing requirements of the police service. I think it's important to get this comparable data, and it's something I would like to see going into this budget, no matter which approach we take. Because if we're going to use Canada-wide metrics like the Crime Severity Index, I think we should do that comparison with other statistics and recognize that we're not the same, and it's not always an apples to apples. And for me, if that data isn't in the budget, and I'll submit that request in writing to make it official, it'd be very hard for me to consider changes. To the specifics of this motion, I actually can't support the motion, not because of the budget piece. I actually think the 385, I have no concerns with that. I think that it's based off very sound principles as to why that number would be set. My concern is actually just going back to the old way of doing things. And I remember the old model of having service packages. And like we talked about earlier today, we approved the downtown beat officers when I was on council in my first term. And then those resources were reallocated. I think when I think about dealing with the holistic issues that we've got to deal with, I would have my preferred option would be to do a formula, but not just for police, that it would truly be for all sort of community safety and well-being. So that might include REACH, that might include EPL, that might include a number of organizations that are doing that proactive work, and allow us to be more coordinated in how we're tackling that. So I can't support it, not because of the budget. I think that's a great piece, but just because it goes back to an old model that I think was even worse than what we had now. And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I decided that I wanted to speak to this just to preempt further discussion at council. I hope that we won't have to come back to this. I'm optimistic. I just want to acknowledge that both Councillor Knack and Councillor Paquette, I think, have spoke with a great deal of wisdom this afternoon. You know, I'm not inclined to support this, at council, and I would sort of urge committee to reconsider this motion because the amount, because I understood that the conversation today was about the methodology, and that the more definitive conversation around amounts and numbers was going to happen over the summer. I hear what the chair of the police commission said with respect to having a business case that can be produced and then having more iterative discussions. I don't think that it was meant to be decided today like this. I heard a lot of criticism of the funding formula, and I think what the funding form, I think providing stable and predictable funding for core services, whether it is snow clearing, fire, transit, or police, I think it's good governance because it takes the politicization, I think, out of that. What I've heard a lot of critiques of the funding formula have been conflated with critiques of the metrics used to evaluate police performance, the metrics used to evaluate value. And I'm conscientious that if we tie, for instance, dollars to crime rates, if we tie it to the dollars to the amount of tickets that get written by officers, we are unintentionally incentivizing, I think, outcomes that this city is trying to move away from. And that we've seen in other jurisdictions have had really deleterious impacts on the relationship between the public and police service. I have, and my colleagues on the police commission would know this, I have long been critical of the amount of police having a revenue line item, full stop, because the public should not know should not see that the police have a revenue item. So I really don't encourage this. I think that we require a much more iterative discussion and a more dispassionate approach, as Councillor Paquette urged. Going back to the service packages, I think will fundamentally mean in 5 years, this council will be spending more on policing than they would have under even the old funding formula. And I truly don't think we can afford that. So
thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Jans? Sorry, Councillor Rice. Councillor Rice first. Councillor Rice is committee member. Councillor Rice.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chair. I just want to say I become a little bit emotional. I feel very sad to heard this motion and then on the floor. But I do understand the intention for this motion. I'm going to say I'm not support this motion, and then there are a few reasons I think is already reflected in my previous question from morning to now. Also, I would like to emphasize police services is our city's core services. That is one major of reason for our taxpayers to pay the tax for us to provide that services. At the same time, I want to say, and then safety, our city's safety as a capital city, our city's safety is a fundamental factor, and for our people, for our business, for our communities. And look at it right now, and start 2020, our police resources was reduced by $22 million. Right now, this motion is going to reduce another $22 million. I don't know what message is going to send it to our public and how we can ensure adequate and sufficient resources to save people's life and to save people from public fears. I just want to share a recent example. I had the public town hall, and that town hall attendance, and I was told, and is break the record attendance. And 130 people, laborers, come to that town hall, and specific addressed how much public safety concern they have in terms of our students go to school, in terms of our employees go to work, and in terms our laborers and walking in our neighborhoods every day. And for this type of reason, what's the point for us to look at the resources limitation and we already face it, and then we already, and then look at last 2 years, we use the new methodology to move $22 million and to the different area. However, the results, there is no indicator and say that is result the demanding for the police. What I heard over and over at the door, and then our public, and then the people in my ward told me, they still want more police in our community. They still want to see more police in our public transit, in our school. And then recently, even like one of my constituents and was bullied in the school, but no police there to help them. And I cannot stand for this. I'm a little bit emotion, but I do feel, and then without safety in place, where our city will go, and who will ensure that safety. We cannot rely on one single resource. It's a joint effort. Thank you very much. So that is why I'm going to put another motion and to support the option 2 for the recommendation from administration.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Chance.
Yeah, I think I'll speak to this now. I mean, the lens I'll be approaching fall budget is the maximal return on investment for every dollar. I think what I can't vote on it now, but I think what Councillor Rutherford's asking us to vote on is we need some sort of an anchor. We need some sort of a piece here, an acknowledgement that we do not have infinite resources. And when we listen to what Chief McPhee told us in the fall about the drivers of crime, it's addiction, it's mental health, it's not necessarily things that the police officer for $191,000 is the best use of an FTE. I think when we look at those level 3 and level 4 and so on calls, the lower level stuff, a lot of what we heard about can be fixed by other services much more economically. And I think we need to think about that. How do we take the burden off police? What I would love to see from the commission is a list of suggested investments for the city in non-police areas. I would love to see the same vocal support for housing, for 24/7 response, for mental health and crisis diversion publicly, as we see for additional officers. We cannot, I mean, an example right here, my colleague shared an example of a student being bullied and she wants a police officer for that. I mean, we cannot sustainably put a police officer in every single classroom. We cannot sustainably put a police officer in every single shop. There is a finite limit here and we will go broke. We know around the world that other people are innovating in policing. This is no different. We need to talk about housing. We need to talk about addiction. It's not lost on me that one of the biggest barriers to drug reform in Alberta is the Alberta police chiefs, and that I think it needs to change. And I beg them with all the empathy in their hearts that we can come up with a better solution around safe supply and harm reduction and stop the opioid poisoning, because continuing to talk about treatment is just leading to more funerals. So we all want the right service, the right time, the right place. I see this as a step towards getting us there. I just come back to that Safer for All report. And again, we had experts picked by this council throughout the community, and they urged us, what does the front page say? Believe us. And the conversation today from a lot of parties kind of felt like, we don't believe you. And that's disappointing considering, again, police were co-authors of that report. So, sadly, this feels like just the beginning. There'll be more conversations. We clearly need more data. We need open data. We need comparables. I commend the city of Edmonton on the work they've done around open data. And if we had that for the police and other services, that would be very helpful as well, too. I think I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Anyone else to speak? If not, I'll take this opportunity You know, as a council, we have very limited tools to hold the police accountable for the resources that are allocated. One is the members that we appoint to the commission. The other tool is when there's a budget process through which we can ask questions. And during my time as a city councilor for 8 years, we didn't have a formula in place. But we asked very tough questions during that process, and we supported police when police needed to be supported. So I thought that process worked really well. I didn't see any challenges with that process. The challenges I see with the guaranteed increases is that you lose that little bit of accountability that you have. And I don't want to lose that accountability because we are here to represent Edmontonians, and we have an obligation to ask questions of the dollars that we collect on their behalf, whether those dollars are making our communities better, safer. That's one concern. The other is that there's only finite amount of money to go around, and we have many, many priorities. And during the budget, that's the only way we balance those priorities, when we have every department putting forward proposals, asking money, and how their money will be used. So when you have a source of funding that is guaranteed, and you have taxpayers who are willing to pay only limited amount of taxes, then other departments suffered. And we have seen that during the last 3 years, where every other department in the city had to take cuts or 0% increase. At the same time, police budget continued to go up. That is not sustainable for the city and the well-being of other services that are absolutely equally important. Police is absolutely important, but public transit is also important. Recreation centers are also important. The investment that we make into well-being is also important, because all those things together build better communities for all of us, not just one single service, all service collectively. And we lose that balance of allocating resources when we have a formula in place. On the $385 million, I think that gives a base level funding. That does not preclude Commission from coming to us with proposals to fund additional resources based on the needs of the service. I think it might give you an opportunity to actually look at reducing some of the other variable funding sources that are less predictable. So I don't see that as a restriction. They give you a base level to work with, on which you can build on. Based on that's the reason that I'm going to support this motion. And I will go to Councillor Rutherford to close.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All day I've been emotional. My heart's been in my chest. We all want the same things. But, it's funny because the chair of the commission said, safe, efficient, and effective. But the problem is, and I'll tell you, sitting in this seat for the last several months, is that how people feel safe, what they perceive as effective, and what they perceive as efficient is quite a gamut across our population. Some people feel safe with police presence, others do not. How do we rectify that? Who do we listen to? How do we make sure that all voices, including the ones that said, believe us, are heard? I heard my colleagues say that this is governance overreach, and I would contend that we are the only municipality that had a funding formula. So if every other municipality in Alberta does not have a funding formula and seems to do fine within the Police Act, I don't see why that would be a problem for us. So I just want to put that out there. I think the argument of predictability is a fallacy, because we had a funding formula and then it was frozen 2 years into that budget cycle. So how predictable was that? In fact, I think that actually caused more harm in the long run, because now we're hearing and getting angry emails from people saying that we've cut police funding. No, we cut budget increase projection. And so I think that that's an important factor to take into consideration. My council colleagues talk about, not having enough information and whatnot, but I've been working in the field of complex adaptive systems and complexity theory for a long time, and what I've learned in my career is that when people are uncertain and feel uncomfortable, they look for crystal clear information to come to a conclusion. We're not going to get that here. We're not going to get this today. We're not going to get it tomorrow. We're not going to get it in December when we have to ultimately make a decision. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. And we've even heard from the commission, like, we don't have disaggregated, racialized data. The data is imperfect. And so trying to get all of that information and all of those numbers is not possible. So we have to make the best decision with the information we have today to move forward and stop delaying the decision again and again, because it is not in the best interest of the public. It is not in the best interest of the commission. It is certainly not in the best interest of the Edmonton Police Service or this council and our time and energy. I know I'm only at 15 seconds, but I really have to say something else. I campaigned on courage, and this is the most courageous motion I've put on the floor since being a councillor to date. When I put the motion on the floor to amend Councillor Jans's motion around funding, the amount of hate email and phone calls that my office received, and never have I sat in a chair like this and worried that my decision is going to affect my children and my family's safety. And so I thought twice about putting this motion on the floor because of that. But I promised myself if I was in this position, I would be courageous. Whether my council colleagues support this when it goes to council or not, I think I do have committee support for this to be a recommendation to council. I think it's important for the public to know where I stand on this and the courage that I'm willing to put forward to show that this isn't about just defunding or the political conversations we've had. It's about making sure we're doing the right thing and we're hearing all of the voices and we're finding that those outcomes that we've already talked about the other days with the safety, community safety and well-being framework that our administration worked on. We're there. We have the wheels in motion. Commission and EPS are doing a good job. So we just need to get it all together and realize that we are still working in a confined budget, and we don't have an infinite pool to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Please vote.
One moment, please. Mr. Chair, can we please do sorry, apologies, Mr. Mayor. Oh, never mind, we have it, thanks.
Got it.
Yeah, do we have all the votes? We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried 3-2.
Mr. Mayor, would you like me to move referral of the remaining items?
Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
We have 6.2 dealt with, and you were able to conclude 6.3, right? Correct. Okay, so we have 6.2 that needs to be referred to the next committee?
That's correct. 6.2 has not been dealt with, and 9.1.
And 9.1. Okay, we need a motion, so Councillor Stevenson.
I will just interrupt here to indicate I believe 9.1 is time sensitive.
Yeah, so if we could refer that, it won't be long, but if we could refer it to council, I know council's book as opposed to the next committee meeting because there's a time sensitive aspect.
So can we refer that to council and make a time specific?
Who had questions on that one?
It was a verbal report, so I selected it.
No, there was a report attached.
But anyways, yeah. We referred this to council. Let's deal with 9.1 first. Refer to council. Councillor Stevenson.
So moved.
and make a time specific 1:30?
Apologies, we're doing them separately, so are we doing 9.1 right now?
9.1 first.
6.2.
Make it 1:30 at council.
Can we not make that item time specific at council? Let's just send it up to council and we'll figure out the most
Okay,
appropriate time.
that's
working
fine.
with the
Got it.
commissioners.
Okay.
But sorry, maybe I will just clarify then. I apologize. I was not able to access this report. I thought it was a verbal report, so I did not have any questions.
You're okay with that, Council, Ms. Corbold, if we?
Mr. Lachlan, are you there?
Really, it's an in-private item that we need executive authority approval. There is some urgency to it. If executive authority or executive committee didn't have the time to deal with it, it can be requisitioned to council, but there is a papered report. It's not a verbal report.
So I would move the recommendation in 9.1.
Okay,
And that the May 18th, 2022 Office of City Manager report remain private pursuant to sections 24, 25, and 27.
Okay.
My deepest apologies.
got it. No worries. Any questions? Seeing none, please vote on 9.1. There you go, Mr. Corbold.
We're just waiting on
Thank
one
you.
vote.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
So we are a vote for to move to council?
We were approving the recommendation because Councillor Stevenson don't have any questions anymore on that.
I believe it's proper and to have the discussion first, because this is something is really sensitive. And then I do want to make sure and we do things moving forward right.
Okay, I can withdraw my motion and then make it a referral motion to City Council on Monday.
We
Apologies.
did not vote on it, so, can we withdraw it, please? The vote, recall the vote.
Can we just make sure that that motion's to requisition 9.1 to council?
Yes,
Please, thank you.
yeah.
Okay. Now it's requisition to council. And you'll figure out the time specific of this.
Requisition, please.
Okay. Requisition, please vote.
Benson? We could just say requisition, not have to vote.
Requisition.
Okay, requisition to council, got it. All right, so that's done. And 6.2, Councillor Stevenson,
I'll move that we refer this to the following executive committee meeting.
vote to send this item to the next executive committee meeting, please. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Any, okay, where we are. Responses to council inquiries, motions pending, private reports, notes of motions. The customary notice, none. We are adjourned.